This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Renegade University is growing fast. We've just added several new faculty who will be teaching courses on history, philosophy, political theory, and creative writing in the winter term. Over the next few weeks, we'll also be announcing several live in-person events and courses in cities across the country. But right now, we have 2 new webinars that are coming up soon. The first one is taught by the great Scott Horton, whose recent webinar on the history of the Afghanistan War was incredibly successful. Scott will be teaching a new webinar called The War on Terror, a Global Catastrophe. That'll be Wednesday, February 7th, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And I will be teaching a webinar on the history of the relationship between the United States and the rest of the world in the 19th century. That's called Dangerous Nation, the United States and the World, 1776 to 1898. And that webinar will be offered on Monday, February 12th, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, 8:30 Eastern. You can get all the information and register for these courses at thaddeusrussell.com. Authoritarian regimes often don't last very long. It's very difficult to keep a people down, to keep them under control, simply through the use of force and coercion. And what quite often happens with kings and dictators who just use the threat of violence against their people is that they create the exact opposite of what they wanted. They create revolutionaries. The same can also happen in families. A father who tries to control every aspect of his son's life will often cause the son to want nothing more than to be free. This is my interview with Michael Boldin. All right, we are here. I am here with Michael Boldin, and he's not a singer.
I could be.
Never was, but he was close to singers. We'll get to that in a second. He runs a project or an organization called the 10th Amendment Center, which I've been a fan of for a while, and I've been a fan of Michael's for a while. I've heard him on other podcasts and on the radio and seen him on TV, and I think these days that what he's doing, and this is not hyperbole, this is what I really believe, I think that what he's doing politically is what is the only thing that can really save us, and I mean like from death, from destruction. Because if you look at, as I've been doing, the strength of not just the United States military, but militaries around the world, I don't see how you can't be terrified every day. And in particular, if you look at the concentration of political power that controls those militaries, in particular here, I think a devolution of power, decentralization, is the only way we can really ensure that we're not going to all get blown up at a moment's notice. And I'd like to think that people on the left are getting this message these days. If they are, it's because of this guy right here who's sitting across from me. So I want to begin, Michael, by just talking about, if you can sort of just sketch out what the 10th Amendment Center is, and I guess sort of 2 things, like what is your argument, because there is an argument, right? And then also just don't go into great detail right now, but just sort of sketch out kind of what you've been doing, because you've been around for more than 10 years, right?
Yeah.
What the 10th Amendment Center actually does and the sort of philosophy that guides it. And then we'll kind of track back, because I'm really curious about you, because I think you and I have sort of a similar trajectory.
Story arc, yeah.
So, yeah, what do you guys do?
Well, I guess there's kind of 2 versions. The short version is we're really big into opting out. So that's like the very short soundbite version, but this isn't a short version conversation.
No.
Right? So the long version is we hold the view that you can't rely on the federal government to fix problems that have generally been created by or perpetrated by the federal government, and that comes in many forms. For example, going to federal courts to ask federal judges to limit federal power, that doesn't really work. Going to federal politicians in the hopes that the federal Congress will overturn laws that have been enacted by the federal Congress in the first place, or, of course, the imperial federal executive branch. This is not really a good strategy. I would argue it's dangerous to rely on that. And so we take the view that there has to be a counteracting force. And for us, that is opting out, whether it's on a state level, a local level, or even down to the individual.
I don't know what you're talking about, because during the Iraq War, I emailed Dianne Feinstein every day.
She doesn't write me back anymore.
Saying, I don't want to be in this war. Can you please not vote for it? And she did anyway. So I don't know, man. I think, well, anyway, I guess you are right. Yeah, we can't, obviously, especially in California, right, where the representatives represent such a massive constituency.
I think that's a misnomer.
Oh, yeah?
That it's especially in California.
Oh.
I think especially in Oklahoma, especially in Rhode Island, especially in New York State, especially in Montana. I think in general, at least in my experience, if you go to the federal government, and the founders, I mean, if I'm running a constitutional organization, the founders actually warned against relying on federal politicians to limit their own power. It's just not going to happen. If we're to do that, we shouldn't be surprised that their power is always going to grow. It doesn't matter where they come from or who they represent. I think that's just the nature of the system. And what's been missing, I think, in most people's activism or thought on this is that there's actually a different approach, an approach that I think government-run schools have probably kind of suppressed over the years, and we're trying to get that information out there. And that's the opt-out. We call it nullification. It's a combination of actions. This is like a forbidden word for many, but it's a combination of actions, whether it's individuals, businesses, state legislatures, all doing things to undermine federal programs that they don't want to see in effect.
All of which is to say that you're a neo-Confederate.
Oh, yeah.
Totally. Well, that is a joke, but it's also true that you get tarred with that.
Sometimes.
Neo-Confederate, it's a cover for racism. States' rights is what you're advocating.
Well, generally I get targeted
and states'
with
rights,
that.
but historically, of course, right, has been associated with the Confederacy and segregation.
Incorrectly.
Okay, fine. But I mean, I'm just saying that's how, often, I think less now, but certainly through the 80s and 90s, from Reconstruction until the 1990s, if you said states' rights or nullification or mentioned the 10th Amendment
That's before my time.
I know. Right? That's what would happen.
For sure.
You would be called, as Ronald Reagan was in 1984, I think it was, when he used the phrase states' rights when he was in Mississippi. It was his famous thing.
Oh, right. I'm familiar
He
with
just
that,
said it, and he was making an argument about basically some devolution of power, right? And it was like, this was one of the worst moments of his presidency because, oh my God, it turns out Ronald Reagan really is a racist who wants to segregate the country again. So it had been, since Reconstruction, since the end of the Civil War, tightly associated with segregation, the Confederacy, and slavery. And you're saying that's not even so. It was nearly impossible to advance the argument you are advancing. It's still difficult, and even you get some of this, right?
Some, not as much when there's a Republican in power in Washington D.C. because
of course
most of the attacks have generally come from the left in that regard. Like, oh, if you oppose the federal government doing X and you want to resist that or undermine it in any way on a state or a local level, then you're certainly a neo-Confederate. Rachel Maddow did a whole 10-minute segment called Confederates in the Attic, talking about our work, undermining, using nullification to...
About your work? Rachel
yes,
Maddow? Really?
Specifically, yes.
I need to go talk to my mom right now. I'll be right back because I just was visiting her in Oakland, and she loves Rachel, and she watches
I don't know.
her
Rach won't call me. I don't know what it
really?
is.
That's weird because she's a smart person.
It's one of the few times. Generally, I get pretty good or fair coverage by the media. But for whatever reason, her or her producers decided to do this segment without even talking to me first, so I couldn't even make a case.
Wow.
So it was a full 10 minutes. And of course, this is when Obama was in office and we were doing our work to oppose, for example, the Affordable Care Act or gun control efforts. And then, of course, if you just target them as racist, then it's really easy to push them aside. But, we do the exact same work today, and those folks aren't calling us those names.
When I watch Rachel Maddow and now Chris Hayes... Oh, when I have to, like when I'm at my mom's house, right? and now Hayes in particular, because that's really depressing. I watch them and I think, okay, they both. Maddow has a PhD. Hayes doesn't have a PhD, but he is as smart as any PhD I've ever known, and used to be until very recently, very actually principled. Even though I would disagree with him on a lot of stuff, and a lot of people who are not lefties respected him. He was like the only guy at only person at MSNBC who was sort of respected among people who were libertarians or conservatives or socialists or whatever, not left liberals. And he really deserved it because he actually took ideas seriously for the most part, and was super smart. And now it's just like Russia.
Oh yeah,
Russia,
I don't even pay
Russia,
attention
Russia.
to it.
And racism. Neither of which exists, at least when he's talking about it. It's really wild. I think were they just told by the executives to just go with this thing, even though they don't know it? There's no way.
I think there's an argument
they can
to
really
be made.
believe this stuff.
I think there's an argument to be made that the market drives this. There are people who want to hear this
like
stuff.
my mom.
Well,
Hi, Mom.
I know you talk about it in your shows, but the tribalism that people want to join Team A or Team B. So when Team A is in charge, Team B has to oppose them no matter what. It'd be fascinating to see the president come out in favor of similar gun control measures that Obama was trying to push, and maybe the left would oppose them just because they have to oppose the president. I think the tribalism runs that deep, and it's very dangerous because no one has principles. They're just on one side or the other.
So I learned intellectualism from my mother. She's one of the most powerful intellectuals I've ever known. She has written scholarly articles on Luce Irigaray, who's this postmodernist psychoanalyst.
Okay.
Stuff that I can't understand.
Okay.
She has been involved and in a very sophisticated level with politics since the 1950s. She was trained by all sorts of major radical intellectuals at UC Berkeley and has been in that world her whole life. She's lived in Berkeley her whole adult life. So she's as sophisticated a person as you can find for the most part in America, right? Or there aren't too many people who are more sophisticated than her. I watch her watching Maddow, and it's like, it reminds me of when my son was 9 months old and we were so exhausted that there was this thing called Baby Einstein. It was just this video of like lights and baubles and figures going across the screen, and for whatever reason it would hypnotize basically the child, the babies, and so parents were like, oh thank God, put Baby Einstein on and we don't have to do anything for an hour. That's what I see.
The magic box.
That's what I see with my
lines,
mother. I see her when she's watching Rachel Maddow. It has the same effect. My son's face would just go slack, blank, and that's kind of what I see. And so afterwards, my mother said something about like Russia or this, and I said, Mom, wait, hold on, really? You think you believe what Rachel Maddow was just saying? I said, oh well, yeah. And I said, well, like, where's the evidence for any of that? And I could see she had never even had to think about that question, and then she realized I guess there isn't, but. I mean, it was just like, it was
maybe
brain
there's something other
meltdown.
than what the TV told me, right?
So, I mean, you're right. I think tribalism is a huge part of it. It's like she also just feels like Rachel's a good person. Yeah. She's one of her, she's one of her people. But anyway, that was a digression.
I've had friends who told me that they were like big fans of Maddow, and they were really disappointed to see how.
I'm pissed off because it's like with Maddow, look, there are a lot of knuckleheads on
the New York Times has been good to me.
Okay, well, they haven't been good to my brain lately, but
well, I don't read it, but they've been. When I'm in there, I will.
So I've been astonished and just pissed off in the last year, especially among. As I was going to say, there are a lot of knuckleheads, of course, of every political persuasion, just dumb people, of course. I get just infuriated when it's people who know better. And I'm not saying you need to ditch the entire Russia conspiracy theory wholesale. Fine, if there's something, fine. But it's like they approach it uncritically. And it's when really smart, really sophisticated people approach any question, uncritically and just push it. I don't know. It's like, I don't want to moralize because I try not to moralize about anything, but it's like it feels like this abrogation of intellectual duty or something.
Well, I think people's brains go out the window it takes a back seat to the tribalism. It's Team A versus Team B always. And in my work, because I started my organization back when George Bush was in office, I was an anti-war activist. I was out in the streets here in LA the day that I guess it would be, what would Horton call it? Iraq War II? I don't know. Back in 2003, the day the bombs started dropping in 2003, I was in front of the federal building in LA marching anti-war.
I was in New York doing the same thing.
And, but the people that were opposing my work when I started my organization in 2006 were pro-Bush people. They didn't like that I opposed the Patriot Act. They didn't like that I opposed the Iraq War. They called me a commie. They said, go to Cuba. And then when Obama came in office, it was just the opposite. You're a racist. And of course, I stayed anti-war through all that as well.
Right, and so I guess I'm expressing this rage sort of on your behalf, because when I've heard you talk and I've just sort of seen what's happened to you, like you're on the SPLC website as some, I haven't read it, but what do they say about you?
Leader of the radical right, one of the top 20 or 25 leaders of the radical right.
Yeah, and then they sort of do this by associating you with people who are neo-Confederates or might be sympathetic to the Confederacy or might be whatever. It's like, okay, even if that's all true, maybe this is stuff I don't know about you that, you really do
want
to bring back segregation or something. Nonetheless, that usually the responses to you and your work don't even go that deep, right? They just simply hear the word nullification.
Yes.
Or I don't know if you use the phrase states' rights, but if you hear that phrase, that's probably a good idea. But if you were just to hear a phrase like that, I think this is less true now, but for decades, as I pointed out, that was it. That was it. That's all you needed to know. And here's how I know, because I used to be one of those people. Right?
Oh, you were that guy.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Of course. Right. I am my mother's son.
Yeah.
And not just that, but I actively sought out that tribe. I wanted to. I was born into the tribe, but I wanted to be not a chief or whatever, but like I wanted to be a major figure in that tribe. I wanted to, which involved learning it and learning its customs, its ways, its language, its culture, all that stuff. And that was one of the things you learn, is that when you hear states' rights or nullification,
it's bad.
Yeah, not just bad,
well,
but racist bad, which is the worst kind of bad.
People did try to use it for racist means.
Of course.
So of course that's going to tarnish something. But I also like to point out some of the hidden history that, for example, in the 1850s, that nullification was the number one thing that was used against the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850.
By abolitionists.
By abolitionists resisting it. They passed what were called personal liberty laws, providing habeas corpus to accused runaways. Their attempt was to nullify the Fugitive Slave Act.
So back up, what was the Fugitive Slave Law?
So this would basically say that it was a way to capture runaways. It would they provide these commissioners that would get paid $10 if someone was an accused runaway. They couldn't actually present their case in court, but if someone claimed to be their owner, then their testimony was considered valid in front of a commissioner, not an actual judge. The commissioner was paid $10 to send them back to slavery, $5 if they did not.
And the states were, am I right, legally obligated to return a slave?
No.
Oh.
No, in fact, there was a court case, 1842, Prigg versus Pennsylvania, that dealt with this for the first round of Fugitive Slave Act that specifically said, although the federal government in the Constitution has something that says things about returning slaves, the federal government still does not have the authority to require states to help them.
The courts interpreted it that way, but what did the act say? Didn't it sort of essentially obligate?
Yes.
Okay, that's
absolutely.
what I meant.
So states were trying to undermine it by not participating.
That's what you're about, right? So the Fugitive Slave Law says states, you must abide by this law, right? You must enforce it for us, right?
Help us out.
If you see a runaway slave in your state, you must return that slave, or at least help us return the slave back to its owner in the South, right? And you're saying that states simply refused to do that.
They didn't participate. For example, the Massachusetts Personal Liberty Act, it was like 1855 or so, specifically forbade the use of state property for prisons, for example, to hold escaped slaves, someone who was caught. They would, if someone was a judge and they took on one of these federal commissionerships to prosecute fugitive slaves, they would be impeached. So they found really creative ways to say, we're not going to participate. We may not actively interfere, although I think there was some talk in Ohio and Vermont of trying to arrest federal agents who tried to do this on kidnapping charges. They probably knew that they wouldn't be able to pull that off, but they basically just did this opt-out. We're not going to participate, and was extremely effective to the point that when South Carolina issued their Declaration of Causes for Secession, they specifically named the Northern nullification of the Fugitive Slave Act as their top reason.
So nullification was used for anti-slavery purposes before there was a Confederacy.
Yes.
Before the Confederacy used this idea.
Yes.
Right?
And mind you, once Trump took office And I've been talking about this for years. This is one of the main things. We talk about how this is a noble use of this principle of nullification. We've been talking about it for years, but we still got called racist when Obama was in office. But as soon as Trump gets in, it was either Nation or Salon.
Yeah.
Put out an article that could have been written by me talking about nullifying the Fugitive Slave Act. Oh, well, why don't we do the same thing for immigration now? Oh, so they know the story, but they're just partisan hacks and have been lying all along.
And one of the very first things that happened after Trump was elected, right, was that California, or there was a movement in California to secede.
Yes.
To secede.
Well, I mean,
am I right?
Yeah.
From
and
the
it's
Union.
very popular. I'm getting calls from people who were always just didn't want to talk
They were
politics with me. They're
secessionists.
like, oh, Boldin, what do you think about this Cal exit thing? I'm like,
There's another word, right, for more than a century that was the kiss of death. If you used that word, you were a racist. Well, now we have like these progressives. This is all lefty progressives in California, like my mom's friends, right? Talking about seceding from the Union. Well, why is this okay now? You know, I think it is. I think it's fantastic. So even though I'm not sure I would want to live in the Republic of California, I completely supported them.
Some of us have to go down with the ship.
Yeah, no. Yeah, you want to be the rat that leaves for Oregon, Michael. And I wish that, of course, movement just faded because, like so many things on the left, they kind of forget to care about certain things.
Well, I think there are some things that don't fade on the left. For example, and maybe we can talk about the marijuana movement. I think is a great example of the work that I do.
That's true.
And this does not come from the right. And in fact, libertarians have also been wildly opposed to this effort for many years to legalize marijuana.
What? Libertarians?
Oh, yeah, some of the
Who?
Well,
really?
Yeah, of course.
I've never heard of that. Libertarians are famous for being, or almost infamous, right, for being,
pro-pot, right? Oh, okay, you're a libertarian, you're just a pothead, right?
Okay, yeah.
That's the standard narrative. But I do a lot of behind-the-scenes, on-the-ground activism, concrete work to get stuff done. And when I'm doing that, not as much in maybe the last 2-3 years, but 5-6 years ago, the top opponents to bills to legalize marijuana, even though the feds say it's prohibited in all situations, were always opposed by groups of libertarians. Because, and the argument goes, okay, well, you're just going to tax and regulate it. You're going to create a local tyranny instead of a far-off one. And I'm like, well, okay, then put down that beer that has the tax and regulation. Not that I'm in favor of more taxes and regulation, but I'm not necessarily a pragmatist in philosophy, but I think in strategy and putting things into practice, I recognize the benefit of taking steps forward, allowing the market to get in and do its work.
So we've just now hit our first point of conflict between us.
Fun.
So I did not vote for Prop 19.
I don't vote.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I opposed it.
Okay.
Which was the first proposition to legalize marijuana, which was, 5 years ago? 6 years? Yeah. For those reasons. Well, it was worse than that. When I read the text of it, I saw it was pretty clear to me. And I was also listening to what like Humboldt farmers were talking about, right? At the time, it was pretty clearly written by and for these guys who wanted to basically establish the Walmart of weed in California, right? It was basically it was an attempt to move weed from an illegal market into this tightly regulated corporatist monopoly, actually. And force out all those less respectable folk in Humboldt County, et cetera. And I don't know. I think that would have been worse. Actually, I'm
not sure.
I'm glad it didn't pass. And look what we got.
Well, in the
now
meantime,
we have full legalization just a few years later.
Yeah. In the meantime, here in LA, there's somewhere between 12 and 1,700 medical marijuana dispensaries in operation. Right. So, I mean, in essence, it's been de facto legal here in California for a long time.
It's hard to say that the failure of Prop 19 was really
a setback.
Yeah.
No, because other states went forward anyways.
It's been a revolution, man. It's been amazing, hasn't it? Like, and we were in the heart of this, like all the way through.
Oh yeah, I remember when I first moved here to LA from Milwaukee in 1995. So Prop 215 passed in '96, early '97. A dispensary opens up in West Hollywood. I didn't know what was going on, but my friend Nicole, she calls me. She's like, "Hey, Boldin, we're gonna go to the weed store," and I'm like, "The what store?" Like I couldn't believe that even though this thing passed, we're going to go to a place and buy some. I mean, I wasn't able to go in. I didn't have a card, but she did. And I went there and I thought this was like, wow, wait a second. These people are doing this even though they're not supposed to. That's pretty cool. Right. So I grew up in a really restrictive home, so I was
Did you?
always really excited about doing stuff that you weren't supposed to do. So that was like, oh, light bulbs. This is pretty awesome.
You have found the right podcast to be on. Just to stay on point here, right?
Yeah.
That's relevant because, to be clear, they were in violation of federal law.
Absolutely.
That dispensary you went to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
They still are today.
Right. Right, that's right, because it's still Schedule 1, thanks to President Obama.
Absolutely. And I gave a speech a few years ago in San Francisco at the 25th Annual Gun Rights Policy Conference. and I said...
Again, proof that you're a racist, but keep going.
And I gave the guy who invited me, I'm like, are you sure you want me to go there? I can talk about whatever I want. He said, yeah, no problem. Just keep it under 8 minutes. So I had this thing down to 8 minutes. I didn't talk about guns at all. I talked about pot. The whole time. I started out by asking people, okay, how many of you here have a gun that you don't have a license for, or that you're breaking the law? Maybe a few people did, I don't know, but there's 500-600 people there. This is not a rousing, like, yeah, I'm violating gun laws. No one was bragging about it. And then I went into the story about all these conventions that I go to, like HempCon here in LA, and about how every business in one way or another who's engaged in this industry, which is billions of dollars, are violating federal law, and on and on and on. And at the end, I said, well, at some point, you gun rights people need to start having the courage of the pot smokers. It was pin drop, and then somebody got it, and the crowd went crazy. They loved it. And the idea is, I think at some point, laws need to be broken because they're either immoral, unjust, or unconstitutional.
Okay, so here's problem number one.
Oh, fun.
You have, I think there are many. I'm going to lay them all out.
Oh, yeah, bring it.
This might be the biggest problem. I don't know. But so if you think about the American people, the electorate, those who vote, really anyone those who live here, right? Most of them, I believe, do not smoke weed. A lot do, but I believe it's a majority who still do not, right? And probably a big majority.
Especially on a regular basis, too.
Okay.
Of course.
And I think it's an even bigger majority who have never and will never, or have never gone to prison, have never been arrested for weed, right?
Right.
Tiny percentage of the American public has suffered, right, the consequences of that law. Am I right? Directly?
Hundreds of thousands of people are arrested at least per year.
Yeah, and we have 350 million
certainly.
people living in this country. So
I wouldn't diminish the number that have.
I'm not diminishing
it.
it. I'm saying, oh no, this is purely strategic.
Okay.
Believe me, I'm for immediate legalization of all drugs today, in this minute.
Okay, strategy. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, no. I'm talking about getting your message across.
Yep.
I'm trying to help you, Michael. Stay with me. Obviously that's a problem, right? Because they're not going to see this as relevant. They might be sort of theoretically, intellectually sympathetic. I'm saying even those who are intellectually sympathetic, like the moms who live down the street here in West LA, right, who have 2 kids in, the school, and their moms, they don't smoke weed, they don't know anybody who's been to jail for anything, right? They would probably, if asked, would probably vote or say that they support legalization of marijuana. Well,
maybe.
Most likely, because they kind of did recently here. Yeah. But they're not going to get that passionate about it, and that's really the problem. Like, they don't see it. Same with gun rights. Like, I think that gun owners are going to be passionate about it, but that's not the core of the electorate. You got to get the middle class, and the American middle class, for a long, long time, right, has been essentially conservative culturally.
I'm not trying to reach the core, though.
Well, you're not going to win.
Well, not in my lifetime, probably not.
Who are you trying to reach?
I'm trying to reach people who things make sense to, who are willing to do things. And I think the core of the country is comfortable until their life is affected by something directly.
That's what I'm saying.
Well,
and it's not, most people in this country are not affected by gun laws or drug laws.
Certainly.
Right. So how are you going to convince them to do anything? How are you going to convince them to care about your organization?
Again, I don't think I'm reaching out to them.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. Again, strategically. At some point, I would want to. But if I spend my time trying to reach people that are very unlikely to take the very difficult activist steps to do something that advances liberty the way that I'm trying to do, I want to reach people who are probably motivated by something to do that. And if I can motivate gun people through a weed story or weed people through a gun story, they're going to be more kind of dedicated, really like aggressive about doing something while everyone else is sitting there watching Rachel on TV.
Was that just a slight at my mother?
No, I love her.
Because don't talk about my mama.
I'm not sure if that makes
You
sense.
know, it's funny,
though.
as I was giving that critique of you, I was thinking, well, geez, what just happened, right? Basically, the United States just had a revolution on marijuana laws. So, I mean, something's been working. I don't know, do we have an explanation for why this has happened all of a sudden? I mean, this is incredible. So you were saying, like, when you got here in the 1990s, right, to LA, in LA then, it was just inconceivable.
Yeah.
You know, that we would ever legalize marijuana. People actually forget this. Even I forget it. It was inconceivable. If you had told me in 2000
Oh, yeah.
that how many states, it's pretty much almost every state
It's
now.
about 30 states with medical, with 8 or 9 legalized for recreational. Huge.
Like if you told me that one state,
Yes.
I would have been like, hell no. That is insane. And like, boom, probably, you know, by the end of this decade, it'll be every state.
And mind you,
Oklahoma, right, has a bill
this summer,
right now.
June,
Yeah.
well, not even just a bill, but it'll be on the ballot sometime in June for Oklahoma voters to choose whether or not to legalize medical marijuana. Mind you, this is right after Republican Jeff Sessions is claiming that he's going to, aggressively enforce federal marijuana prohibition.
Yeah. So again, okay. Oh yeah, do we have an explanation for why?
Well, I think people recognize after time that you can, the legalization advocates, and mind you, I wasn't involved back then. I really didn't start my activism until, maybe 2001 or so, and then really much more so when the Iraq War started. So I wasn't involved back then. From what I've read and from people that I've talked to, people tried for decades to get legalization bills introduced and passed in Washington, D.C., and they just failed. And there was a recognition, and I think NORML, probably National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, a great guy, Paul Armentano, is a deputy director there, and I've learned a lot from him over the years. I should probably reach out to him. I haven't talked to him in quite a while. But
And Ethan Nadelman and his organization, right?
Which one's
Drug.
that? Drug Policy Alliance.
Yeah.
Very good too. Well, NORML.
I mean, they were really at the front of this, right?
Yeah, well, I learned from NORML, this is more just my own experience, that they actually looked to what happened during alcohol prohibition for some strategic ideas. And I'm not sure how deeply they've looked at it, but I've looked at it quite a bit.
Oh, yeah?
And sometime, I think it was like 1925 or 1928, half of the states in the country had laws on the books that banned them from expending resources to help enforce the Volstead Act. And this is basically saying, okay, you have your federal law, but we're not going to enforce it on a state level.
This.
There's a University of Houston study that came out that was really interesting.
Wow, that's great. It's
a
not
number of years
surprising.
ago. So they just didn't participate. So enforcement on a state and local level was very low, and the feds didn't have the resources to do it. And what ends up happening? Well, plenty of people were drinking, buying and selling this product, and the same kind of thing is happening. I'm not sure if NORML or DPA or any of these people even see that similarity. I certainly do, where we're not going to participate. There's bills that even take it even further. For example, here in California, Assembly Bill 1578 has already passed the Assembly. This would ban the use of California resources or personnel to help enforce federal prohibition of marijuana. This is a very effective method. It always has been, and I think it could be applied to other stuff.
So that still begs the question, though,
Okay,
right?
why did this happen?
Both about what happened during Prohibition and now. And I don't have an answer to it. I'm just wondering if you do. I mean, I haven't heard anybody have an answer.
My
for
guess
this.
is that people tried one way for a long time, and they recognize what I basically said at the beginning, that if you keep going to these people in D.C., you're not going to get results. So maybe there's another approach.
No, but why are housewives in Oklahoma voting to legalize marijuana now?
Well, if I would have talked about marijuana in Oklahoma in 2009, I would have. I would have.
Like, why? I would have
been booed off the stage. I think people. Well, the story has always been, okay, if you allow people to consume this plant, or grow it, or buy it, or sell it, the world's going to come to an end. And then when people do it, and the world doesn't come to an end, and a lot of people get rich, it becomes more of a, I may not be in favor of it, but why should I stop
Yeah,
others?
but that's been going on for a long time, right? That's
Has
been
it?
going on. Reefer Madness, since Reefer Madness.
Well, has it gone on in such a public way? I think it was. I can remember visiting people in Austin, Texas a few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago, and these are all like weed activists, and they're going to light up a joint, and they're like, oh, let's go hide in the kitchen. And I'm like, man, you got this huge backyard. Why don't you do that? I think it was kind of like in the shadows. And now that there's corporate backing and there's a lot of money being made, and it's very public. I mean, CNN's New Year's Eve TV special, so that shows you how cool I am. I was watching that, the Anderson Cooper thing. They're like in Denver, at a party where they're doing
Oh,
bong
no.
hits.
I know, but why did this start, right? The first state was Colorado, is that right?
No, California here.
Oh, well.
Prop 215.
Okay. I mean, yeah, it depends on how you count it, but yeah. So it was in the West. That's interesting. But
Well, the further away you are from Rome, the more you're more
yeah,
likely
well, that's
you
part,
are.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe. But here's my, I just came up with a theory as you
Okay.
were speaking. Let's try this, okay? So when was that? When
96.
Oh, there goes my theory.
2006?
I was thinking, well, yeah, but it didn't really take off as a movement until much later, right? Colorado was really big.
On the state level?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was already pretty large by 2005 when Gonzalez versus Raich, the Supreme Court case, basically said we don't care if states have these laws. There were 14 states that had medical at that point.
Okay, but again, right, it didn't really become a movement. Like even then, in 2005, if I had said to you in 2005 that we would have 30 states with legal weed by 2018, you would have been like, hell no, right?
Probably, right.
Yeah, okay, so, but, right, it became a movement. Like, it gained this energy, this force, became a national thing.
Or
a cultural shift about when? Like, what would you say?
Well, could it have been a cultural shift in strategy?
Like, when did it look possible that this could happen?
Before my time.
No.
I think so.
Huh? No. Oh, I mean, I don't know what your time is, but I mean, so
Pre-2005.
it was more recent than that. Right?
Well, I think it's just been the shift in strategy. And once California so there was like 2, if not 3 presidents that came to California before the 96 vote on Prop 215.
And this is where I'm going, but keep going.
Basically saying, supremacy clause, you can't do this. The federal government says this is illegal. It doesn't matter what you do on a state level. But California voters did it anyways. And then they opened up businesses. And then prosecutions came, and they kept doing it. And I think whether it's Oregon or Hawaii or Washington State or elsewhere, people recognized, oh, wow, we can actually do this. Because people have been buying, selling, consuming, growing pot for decades before any of these legalization bills ever even were thought of. They've just been doing it. And I think 96 was the impetus for more states to do it. And each one that did it proved that another one could do it.
Because California got away with it, basically. Or they right, in 96.
Yeah, I mean, people went to prison. One guy died in jail for running a dispensary in West Hollywood. I mean, really
Christ.
awful
What was that guy's
things.
name?
I don't know. I don't remember. But West Hollywood, again, is now at the forefront on full legalization. But certainly, I think it just proved that there is a different path. And most of the resources seem to be going that way anyways.
Okay, so here was my theory, which I'm not throwing out entirely, but I'm modifying it now.
Can I hear the original version?
Well, to me, it was about Obama's what's called overreach. You know, as you well know, because I've heard you talk about this, and everybody knows who's followed this stuff at all. Pretty much as soon as Obama got into office, right, he started cracking down big time.
Major.
More than. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so the Obama administration in their first term spent more on enforcement and raids than Bush and Clinton combined, and everybody thought Bush was a total nightmare, which he was a monster, but Obama was even worse. And
wait, in his first 4 years?
First 4 years.
Compared to their 16 years.
Yes.
Yeah, 16 years of Bush and Clinton, he conducted more raids and arrested more people.
And spent more money.
And spent more money.
More enforcement.
Enforcing the federal prohibition
Yes.
against marijuana.
He was horrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrible. And I know Jeff Sessions sounds horrible, but I think at some point what they did, so just before the Colorado legalization was about to go into effect, that November, late November, they did the largest series of marijuana raids around the state of Colorado.
This is my theory.
Okay.
That's what got it really going.
Oh, I'm
fast.
sure that took it to another level.
But I think you're also right. I think 50% of my theory now is because of what you said. I mean, I think it started. You're right. I think it started. This completely supports your entire project,
well, I'm glad we had this
argument, your life's work.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I do
I
actually
guess we're
think,
done here,
because then I'm thinking, yeah, let's go home. California, the famous or infamous, depending on which side you're on, tax revolt of the 1970s,
I'm not
which
familiar
gave us
with it.
Proposition 13.
Oh, okay, yes.
Right? It was sort of known as like the beginning of the Reagan Revolution, you know, rebellion against or revolt against taxes. You know, this was a proposition in 1978, I believe it was passed, which reduced property taxes pretty radically. That began, guess where? In California.
A lot of weird things happened.
Which, of course, that's considered a very right-wing movement. right? But no one disputes, whether you hate Prop 13 or love it, no one disputes that it started locally.
Yes.
And then it became a national movement. And it was originally against state taxes, but then it became a national movement against taxes, which then pretty much helped Ronald Reagan become the president just 2 years later.
I call it Nullifornia.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I mean, whatever your position is on
right?
sanctuary cities on immigration, certainly California is just, I mean, they're flipping the bird to Washington, D.C., and they're trying to ramp it up even further. So, and this isn't just an anti-Trump thing. They've been doing this. So San Francisco has the ordinance, the sanctuary ordinance has been on the books since the 80s. So this is California is willing to defy Washington on some stuff.
But either for a right-wing cause or a left-wing cause, right?
I guess so.
That's what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
But So here we have California with weed also being the pioneer, right? By being the first to go out there and take on Washington and effectively nullify a federal law, and then it followed. A national movement followed. But I don't think it really got much energy, much momentum until Obama came along and really enforced it big time.
Yeah, he was so aggressive
and
about it.
I think what happened, I don't know, but I think my sense is that what happened was that people saw for the first time media reports, right, on CNN in their local newspaper about all these dispensaries, and they looked like what? They looked like my son going to jail. They looked like, the ragamuffin kid down the street, with long hair and a skateboarder, being carted off by cops and being thrown in these cages.
That brings it closer to home, you're saying.
Yeah, because he really did. He went way above everyone else in terms of enforcement. So they're really seeing it. And it's being covered, and even though it's Obama, it's kind of amazing that he didn't get away with it because he got away with so much else. But for whatever reason, he didn't get away with that, and I think it's because
they don't have the resources.
Because everybody, not a majority of people smoke weed, but pretty much every American knows someone who smokes weed.
Well, I think a couple of things happen. So maybe, and I hadn't thought of it like that.
And kids too. See, it's also affecting kids, right? Because it's teenagers and young adults mostly who smoke marijuana, right? And so that's my guess. I don't know, but my guess is that you just had mom and dad in Oklahoma or wherever seeing on TV, in the newspaper, pictures of
normal
kids,
people,
maybe even their own kid, but kids who look like their kids going to prison.
I think that's part of it now that I hear it. That's very interesting because it personalizes what's happening, right? On the other hand, there's once the pro-weed guy got into office, Obama, supposedly he was going to be super friendly. This is terrible, like on so many other things, but he was awful on this. I think organizationally, a lot of people who were funding this type of effort were like, oh man, the only approach now that even we get one of our guys on our side in Washington, D.C., even this guy is terrible.
That's right.
So Drug Policy Alliance had a white paper that talked about the amount of money that it costs per raid, per enforcement effort, and we put it all together, and it would basically take about 40% of the DEA's annual budget to shut down Los Angeles.
Right.
So, I mean, I think people just recognize, like, look, they don't have the money to do this. They don't have the resources to do this. Let's just do it anyways.
Yeah. I just wish that lesson, if that was the lesson that people took, that getting your guy into office will fix your problem. I wish that it extended to things like foreign policy and immigration.
No.
Yeah.
And privacy too, surveillance.
And surveillance.
I mean,
because he got away with literally murder.
I think it's
in all those cases.
I work very hard on building coalitions with groups that don't agree with me on a lot of stuff. So I spent a lot of time with ACLU. I had a coalition with Electronic Frontier Foundation, who I love on a lot of things, their work, and Greenpeace against NSA surveillance. So 10th Amendment Center, Greenpeace, and EFF. And of course, I have some people who are like, that's great, and some people are like, oh, you shouldn't associate with these people. I don't care. I want to get something done. So it's unfortunate to see the pro-privacy groups, now that NSA surveillance has been reauthorized and extended, I see from them that their strategy is, well, we're gonna work on another lawsuit, or we're gonna work on getting new people in Congress, even though the so-called Democrat resistance all helped give more spying power to Donald Trump. It's insane. It's massively nuts to keep doing the same thing and expecting different results.
Right. So even though obviously you're not principally responsible for this revolution, you certainly played a part in it, didn't you? About marijuana laws? I mean, you were doing the work, weren't you, all through this time?
I have been doing the work.
You were in the trenches doing this stuff
with
for sure. People like Normal and with Ethan Edelman's organization and all these, right? And so, I mean, but not only whether or not you can take credit for it, nonetheless, you have this thing that you can show to people and say, look, it works.
Yes.
It can work.
And that's the message.
And it really is revolutionary. Yeah, it's just weed, whatever. But it represents something much
that's
bigger.
the argument. We hear that argument,
but it's also
too.
putting people in fucking cages, okay?
Yes.
So it's not such a little thing that we can laugh about, because you hear this a lot, right? Oh, well, people sort of dismiss it. Oh, it's about weed. Like Obama famously laughed at the kid who asked the question in that town hall or whatever it was. And he's like, oh, well, it's not going to happen because it's just marijuana. Oh. It's like, no. It's like putting people in cages for smoking a plant that makes them feel good.
Doesn't that say something about how far that movement has gone? Because 10, 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been, oh, it's just weed.
Well, no, but you still hear people kind of,
they do poo-poo it that way when they aren't on board with the issue.
Yeah.
So I say to them, I'm like, okay, let's say you don't care about weed. Let's do it on guns. And then I talk to them about a bill that's pending in Tennessee to do the exact same thing on guns, for example.
Right.
So for me, it's more important because most people aren't going to be with me on all issues all the time. I think almost no one is going to be. I want to see decentralization on everything. Yeah. So most people aren't going to be on that, and they don't have the time to work on that or spend time, being activists. So I just try to find something that's important to them, provide them example of how it can work, how it has worked in the past, and then say, okay, on this, let's do the same thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the Fugitive Slave Act now. I don't know what the numbers are. I'm not sure we have the numbers, but I think there were very few slaves who were actually returned, in part because there were just very few fugitive slaves.
Yes.
I would bet you that there were more people who were put in prison for what became life sentences, essentially, or for many decades, than there were fugitive slaves who were returned. And certainly it's got to be comparable.
There's a guy who did a study on this. I wish I
really?
knew who it was.
Because I got to think that the fugitive slaves who were actually returned, according to that act, probably is in the hundreds.
It was a small number, yes.
Yeah, something like that, right?
Part of the reason,
So you were talking about people dying in prison for weed.
Yes.
Yeah. And many people spent decades just for dealing marijuana, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Many people. Yes. Thousands?
I mean, hundreds of thousands are arrested every year. I don't know how many of them spend a long time in jail.
So I know this is really politically incorrect, but how exactly is it any less significant to put someone in prison for life than returning a slave to slavery? I mean,
how is that politically incorrect?
Oh, well, because nothing is as bad as slavery, and how could you ever compare it to? I don't.
Oh, yeah, moral equivalence garbage. Yeah,
well, whatever. I'm
it's
not even making
to
a moral
ruin
claim.
someone's life is really the end result.
Look, just ask yourself. Is there would you pick one or the other? I mean, it's both are as bad as it gets in human experience, right? At least from where I sit, You could even make an argument that being in prison for life is worse than being a slave.
Some people have made that
in
argument,
fact,
yes.
I would argue that. But being a slave certainly is not something, is certainly at the bottom of the list as well. That's how bad it is. That's how big a deal this is. This is not just smoking weed. This is not just getting high with your buddies and eating snacks and watching TV. It's
right to
about
self-ownership.
People putting people in cages for a long, long time in many cases. Okay. So here's another thought I just had while you were speaking that has nothing to do with anything you just said.
Oh, good.
Which is this. I've had this weird thing. You may have had this. It hit me I think it was last night.
I have all kinds of weird
things. I watch a lot of talking heads on TV.
Okay.
I watch a lot of people talking about politics and being really passionate and really invested in this thing about politics and shouting and yelling and giving these extensive arguments, in public, and they're just consumed with this thing, and they just completely believe that whatever it is, the minimum wage is great, or the minimum wage is terrible, or Jesus is the savior, or Jesus is bullshit, or they're completely. And I look at them and I watch after hours and hours. After a certain point, something happens cognitively with me, and they just become faces. And then I notice that I start to separate the body from the words. Right, and the ideas.
There's
right?
no acid.
And then I notice that, my God, all the people on different sides, radically different sides of these issues, look the same. So it's they could be interchangeable, right? You can take I was watching Tony Perkins, the Family Council Research Council guy. He's this Christian conservative, anti-abortion, anti-gay rights, blah, blah, hardcore Christian evangelical type. Talking, I was looking at him, I was God, you look like you could easily be, just in terms of how he looked and presented himself, easily be a communist professor at Brown University or something. I mean, right? I mean, you could, I don't know. So, Michael, you look like a communist.
Okay, I used to be.
Yeah. Oh, right. So, but I mean, it's
was
just
that a setup?
Funny. No, I really just thought of this.
Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't a set.
I live in L.A. I mean, I'm
No.
surrounded by Green Party people. I
Yeah.
like the lifestyle. I tell my friends in New Hampshire when I go to Free State Project events, I like my tyranny warm. I mean, I enjoy the food. I like the culture. I mean, and I come from that thought.
Well, that's what I was getting at. Yeah, so you and I both come, although me more originally, because I was born into it, but you kind of
I don't know. So I was born into Catholicism. Ooh. So very, very hardcore.
Because you could also pass for a Jewish communist, you know.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure
you've told that many times.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been called a Jew.
I've had gefilte fish, Manischewitz
totally
wine, many times. But I was born into Catholicism. My parents were hardcore. Maybe this is, and I haven't really thought about this, but maybe this is part of where it comes from. Outside of the, everything was wrong, and I want to oppose everything that I'm told to do. That's
anti-authoritarianism.
That was definitely what I had. But my parents were activists as well. They were anti-abortion activists in the time that when people were like chaining themselves to abortion clinics. This must have been the 80s, some point.
Operation Rescue?
Yes. So I'm not sure how deep they were in. I remember we didn't have babysitters very often, but we did for those things. So I'm not sure what they were doing, to be honest with you, but I know they were out there in some resistance movement, an anti-abortion.
Yeah, so I was in college in the 1980s when Operation Rescue was doing its thing. So I know no one who had anything to do with Operation Rescue until I met you, but I've known dozens of people who volunteered to go defend women entering clinics from Operation Rescue, people who would like go out and picket, not just picket, but harass them, yell at them, sometimes even spit on them, call them all these things. That's what they did. And then what happened to them? One of their members, is this right? One of their members killed a doctor, and that kind of destroyed their movement. I want to say that. I think that's what happened. I think one of their members did that, shot a doctor, an abortion doctor, like through the window in his dining room from outside from the street.
Suddenly we didn't have babysitters.
You're like eating dinner, and then you're dead.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that's kind of what killed them, killed the movement. But anyway, so your parents were they in Operation Rescue?
I'm not 100% certain.
But they were that type.
They were definitely in that
They
realm.
were out there.
Absolutely.
They were harassing women who were getting abortions.
Possibly. I'm not sure exactly what they were doing, if they were carrying signs, if they were harassing, spitting. I don't know. I don't think they're the type that I could be wrong.
But they love gays, though.
No. I think,
and pro-porn. They
really for sure.
Definitely want more.
That's the traditional.
They want porn in the schools.
That comes from Vatican II.
Yeah, so no, they're just straight up evangelical Christians on that stuff, right?
Hardcore. Very
classical cultural conservatives.
Very hardcore.
Yeah. I respect that, actually, because they know who they are.
Well, certainly they have principles, and I think they hold to it.
I don't see a contradiction. I think it's logically, intellectually consistent. I think there's no self-deception. I don't think it's dishonest at all. In fact, I think it's quite honest. I have great respect for people who are as far away from me, right, politically, as anyone can be. I do, because what drives me nuts is the dishonesty and the internal contradictions of especially the left, but also even neocons and other people, like even some libertarians, a lot of libertarians. Drives me crazy. But when I come across like a Jeff Sessions, like that dude knows who he is. You
want to get me angry, don't
It all
you?
makes sense.
It's true.
Then you know who your enemy is, right?
Yes.
And then we could just fight it out and be like, shake hands, and then you go to your barricade and I'll go to my barricade and I'll try to shoot you in the head. And you'll try to shoot me. But that, you know what I mean? Instead of like, hey guys, we're on your side. We're for freedom. Oh, and then they stab you in the back.
Yeah.
And so anyway. So, damn, that was your family.
Yeah, very hardcore, but there was a lot of activism going on, and
activists, not just conservatives,
not just talking about it around the dinner table. Definitely going out and doing stuff.
Besides abortion, what were the big issues that they cared about?
Abortion.
Really? Really got them going, huh?
I can't even think of anything else.
That was really the thing.
I can't think of anything else.
It's interesting.
There was some point when when I started going to anti-war events, some rallies here in LA. I remember talking on the phone to my dad. So there must have been something else. Anti-communist too.
Oh yeah.
So I talked to my dad, and then maybe that's where I started identifying
with
with
communists in
communism.
the 1980s.
Oh yeah, we used to pray for the
When the
mujahideen in Afghanistan in our nightly prayers every night.
No way.
We would pray for the success. Mind you, that this Bin Laden. Right?
Wait, yeah, seriously. Well, hold on, Michael. Back up. You really? Your parents,
we said prayers.
You would pray
for the mujahideen fighters to throw
for
off
Osama
the
bin
Soviets.
Laden
Yes.
to be victorious in Afghanistan.
It must have been my prayers
his,
that did
his,
it. So certainly my prayers brought down the towers.
Damn, that's pretty hardcore.
Oh yeah, so
I appreciate that. No, I do. I respect that.
It's fascinating because this is not stuff that I really think about.
I don't respect making children do that.
No, we were made to.
I'm not into that part. I hate. This is another thing I hate. Hate indoctrination of children by parents. It's one thing my parents never did, as far as I know. Never explicitly, deliberately did that. They just served as models for me. But I really get upset when I see like kids at like marches, who are like 5 years old, carrying a sign or something.
No, I did that a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
We would do like pro-rosary marches and go out and pray in the street, and people would be driving by honking and yelling at us and stuff. But we did a lot of that kind of thing. But certainly the praying for the mujahideen, so the anti-communist things. And I was saying, I started going to these anti-war events, protests in the street, and I remember telling my dad, I'm going to go do this thing.
Wait, how did that happen, though? That's not what you're supposed to do.
Well,
you're talking about, like as a teenager when you're
so I didn't get involved politically.
Later.
I just was like disgusted by politics in general. I never voted, and then in the mid '90s, I moved from Wisconsin to here in Southern California. Well, a couple of reasons. My sister would say I escaped that upbringing, which she did, moving to Boston, which is possible. I haven't given a lot of thought.
Oh, you didn't? It wasn't conscious? You didn't know why?
I would tell people at the time that I was leaving because I couldn't handle the cold anymore. So we had a week of minus 20-degree weather, and I'm like, I can't do this.
Now, were you? I assume you were a believer up until a certain point, right?
A Catholic?
Yeah.
Yeah, even after I moved here in California,
oh, wow.
I went to Catholic church for a few years.
And were you a right-wing Catholic too?
No, I think I was lefty.
Did you still hate? When did you change your mind about abortion? Or did you change your mind about abortion?
I don't really think about it much.
How about communism? Well, no, I mean, so, right, okay.
At some point, I remember there were these bailouts for airlines.
Yeah.
And my initial thought was...
Like when you're a teenager?
Yes.
Okay.
My initial thought was... So there must have been a transition at some point. My initial thought was, well, if the government's giving all these money to these airlines, why don't they just own them? So my general thought was, government should own stuff because they're putting so much money into it anyways. Now, is that pure Marxism, or is it... I mean, it's government ownership of the means of production, I guess.
When did you start smoking weed?
I don't smoke.
You never have?
I have.
Oh, but it's not a thing.
No, if I have weed, I would eat it. So,
and you didn't?
I was a heavy smoker, cigarette smoker for a number of years. So I got to the point, Pink Dot Delivery in Los Angeles. I don't know if you ever had any experience with this, but you could call them at 1 a.m. when I lived in Hollywood for a while, and call them at 1 a.m. and say, hey, what kind of Pop-Tarts do you guys have? Blueberry frosted? Okay, and 2 packs of Parliament 100. And they'd show up in 30 minutes, and you'd pay a big tip, and I would be smoking like crazy, and I smoked all day. I got to the point of 2 packs a day.
Oh, okay.
So
I thought you were saying they would include some cannabis.
Oh, you're excited for a really cool story.
Yeah, I thought it was like a little black market thing.
This is going to be like an Angela Keaton interview, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was just this economics thing, like about the bailouts of the airlines. You said, instead of bailing them out, why doesn't the government just own them? Right?
Yeah, or a stadium, for example. I could apply this. It was my logical conclusion.
But I mean, right? But on the cultural stuff, like, do you remember a time thinking, wait a minute, hold on now, I don't know if this sounds like much fun to me, living like a conservative Catholic.
Well, I don't think I ever really did. So I was a real problem child.
Okay.
I mean, maybe this is part of why I'll never have children. So I was a really, I acted out a lot. I think too much structure at home meant when I was in school, I was taking a kickball and to my 5th grade teacher and smashing her hand-painted nativity set just to prove that I could when she told me to sit down. So
Catholic school?
Yes.
Was it a nun?
No, it was a very old Chinese lady who was on her verge of retirement. I think I drove her there, dumping glue in her hair. I mean, I think there's
Were you in Catholic schools the whole time?
I was in Catholic school for grade school. I went to a number of different ones. So I went to one Catholic school from kindergarten through 5th grade, another one for 6th. through 8th, and then I went to public school for 9th, and then another public school for 10th through 12th.
Which means you know a lot of stuff. You're super smart because you learned so much from those schools.
Maybe through experience.
I don't think so. Well, you learned to hate authority. I can tell you that much. That was useful.
Yeah, for something, right?
Yeah. Okay, so you're acting out at school. Is this a constant thing?
Oh, it was bad.
Like what? Okay, tell me more.
Throwing a book in a teacher's face. I was way too so. I graduated when I was 17, graduated high school. I started kindergarten. I was on the cusp, but they had a cutoff date. I don't know if they still do this.
Same with my son. He's young. He's younger than everyone else.
So I was a year younger. I had people who graduated high school I don't know, what's the calculation? I was definitely a year. I could have been a year behind.
Right.
And so I was frightened. I didn't spend a lot of time with other people. We were basically kept isolated, generally the viewpoint. So I was talking about going to these protests. My dad, his first thought was, oh, you better be careful there. There are communists that go to these. So his approach to parenting was, in general, if there are people who have viewpoints that are not approved of, don't spend time with them. So as a child, a lot of my childhood was isolated. We lived far away from the school that they put us in. So over summers, my friends weren't around. I was definitely isolated. And so that led to a lot of acting out.
You were quarantined.
Definitely. At one point, and this just happened years ago, my mother once told me, oh, we had actually thought of putting a fence up so you couldn't get out of the yard.
Man.
I said, Mom, does that sound normal?
How bad was it? I mean, did you have friends?
It's been very difficult for me to I have friends now. I've had friends all along, but friends tend to be more transient. I think it's been a defense mechanism to just have kind of fleeting friendships. I have people that I consider great friends. I'm not sure if they think the same of me. They may love me or like spending time with me, but I think I've always been bad at keeping friendships.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of us. But I mean, as a kid, though, did you have friends?
No, not. I mean, I did that I would call, but could I talk to them right now and say, did you consider me your friend as a kid? I think many of them would have said, oh, I remember playing with you kickball, but they may not have thought of me as a friend because they had all their other relationships throughout the summer vacations or whatever where they were hanging out with their neighbors, and I was nowhere nearby, 15, 16 miles away as a kid. So we did not see any of my classmates.
Oh, you were physically isolated too?
Physically
Like you were outside the city? Or?
We were in a different part of the city. So this is in Milwaukee, where my parents wanted me to go to school was in one part of the city. They didn't consider it a safe neighborhood. And so we lived in an industrial suburb, a factory suburb, and we still went to that school. So
You lived in a factory suburb. Just,
the pig slaughterhouse.
Just to make it a perfect picture here. So did you ever spend the night at a kid's house?
No, not once.
Not
and I
once.
never saw a movie in the theater as a kid either. Not one.
Oh, my.
No.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, yeah.
So when I first discovered Dr. Strangelove, man, I don't know if you could still do this, but I had a DVD player that put it on repeat. I had it on repeat for like 3 straight days.
Yeah, there's a lot of other things to discover, too.
Yes, there were.
Holy cow. So I take it you had no girlfriends
Not
or
really,
boyfriends.
No, I mean, no.
Did they say anything to you about masturbation?
No, there was no conversation about anything like that.
Right. It's
No.
unspoken. Yeah. Did you, what
Yes.
did you, I know this is a little, it's not off topic actually. Did you remember?
This is all off topic.
No, it's not. Do you remember having any thoughts about sex at all? One way or the
Oh, a
other?
lot.
Okay.
Oh, I acted out a lot.
How so?
I don't know if I'm going to get into those
Okay.
details, but there was a lot, and it was very early. I would write. I basically wrote pornos as a kid. I mean, like 5th grade.
Awesome.
Like, I think it's because I wasn't brought to me in a healthy way. It was restricted. It was presented to me as dirty and weird, and not something based out of love. And I think that drove me to do all kinds of probably unhealthy things in my behavior.
By yourself though, right? Not with other people? Like you weren't.
Well, as I got older, with other people,
Okay.
for sure. Yeah,
Huh. When you were still at home?
a little bit.
Okay. You would write pornos?
Yeah, just that was my way of
Like sex stories?
Sex stories, yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Very graphic.
Really? 5th grade?
5th grade, maybe before. I'm thinking 5th though, because I remember there was one point in time where it was like all this like ruled notebook paper that I tore out, and like when I would get to the cool part, like the writing would get really big, and the time where my parents found this.
Oh my God.
And I don't know how much of it they read, but like to have that conversation with them was to this day, I can feel, like, as we're talking about it, I am feeling this discomfort from sitting there and the, like, oh, what is wrong with you type of conversation. Why would you want to do this? This is not normal. This is not good. That's
bad. What they said?
Yeah. I don't know the words that they said, but those are the feelings that I have that were associated with whatever they told me.
I'm thinking, like, what would I say if I were them, right? What would someone with that ideological commitment, or whatever you want to call it, belief system, say to their 10-year-old son who's written a porn novel?
It must have been 15, 20 pages handwritten.
Oh, my God.
10?
What would you say? I don't know. I really don't know. How would you handle it? I mean, the church must have some guidance for this at some point. I mean, some priests have some advice.
I have no idea.
Because guess what, Michael? I bet you're not the only kid
who's
raised in a family like that who's done something like that. In fact, I
was an altar boy too.
Pretty much guarantee it. Yeah, no. Of course, there's lots of stories, and in particular, it's a thing with Catholics. I've noticed. There's a lot of what you describe as rebellion or acting out. Man, I can't even tell you how many Catholics I've never raised as Catholics who have done that stuff and more as kids.
I mean, wonder if it's
really a thing.
I wonder if it's something that comes less from, and I've thought about this, if it's less from Catholic doctrine and more from a 1950s kind of social view of how to raise children. I think my parents were definitely straights in that time. They definitely weren't in the Dylan world in the late 50s, early 60s. But I don't know.
You want to hear my theory?
I do. I mean...
Yeah, no, it's just so the Protestant Reformation was in large part an effort to discipline the masses, because the whole critique of Luther and Calvin was that the church was doing a terrible job of disciplining people, because they were all corrupt and they were, selling entrance to heaven, and they were having multiple wives and mistresses themselves. The clergy, even the Pope, right, was incredibly, infamously now like a sexual hedonist. And
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, and then the cities of Europe were just like full of prostitutes and drunks and criminals and all. I mean, it's true. Like the Luther and Calvin's critique was correct historically. This is not really contested. I mean, the behavior of ordinary people in the church, during that time, was hardly Christian. And the argument was that it's because of the hierarchy, right? There's so much distance between you and the priest and the bishop and the cardinal and the pope and then God. And on top of that, you're illiterate, so you can't read the Bible.
Right.
You can't read the Bible. And they interpret it for you. And so by the time, it's like telephone. It's like the game of telephone, right? With God, by the time God's word gets down to you, it's go fuck your sister. I mean, that's what it be, right?
Right.
And so that's actually, it's not dumb. Like, I think that's right. I think that's actually what happened.
How does that apply to my situation?
But my point is that it didn't get internalized, right? Because it's all external also. So the hierarchy in the church is this external authority that punishes you if you do the bad thing, if you commit the sin. But that's not so great at like convincing you that you are bad. It might. In some cases it does, certainly. But like mostly you end up becoming just like a dog, afraid of being whipped. And that's what you're mostly afraid of, is the external punishment, which the Catholics are really good at and always have
so
been.
So is the Department of Justice.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. There, right.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, we're coming back to Jeff Sessions in a second. No, I'm serious. I have the same.
Totally.
This is why I say to Jeff, bring it on, motherfucker, because you're gonna create what Obama created, but even better, because we are gonna win that thing. Oh
easily.
My God, bring it on. Anyway, so I think that's why Catholics tend to be more rebellious, rowdy, invested in their, less, or sort of more involved in bodily pleasures, more sexual. I mean, the famous Catholic girl stereotype is not totally untrue. But anyway, so I think if you had been raised in a Protestant household, because I've known a lot of Protestants too, man.
I'd be boring.
You don't need cops or priests for them.
I don't need them either. But.
Because they're just really regulated internally.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
God is inside of them. They've read the Bible themselves.
I've read it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the Catholics got better when they got the competition from the Protestants, and they started, the Protestants have a point here. No hierarchy or little hierarchy. Get the Bible and God into those people's heads, then we don't have to regulate them ourselves. They'll do it. They'll do it to them. Yeah. So I don't know. It may not apply to every Catholic.
It's interesting, though. I mean,
Did you have experience? You must have had experiences with the priest, right, in your church. And
What kind of experiences?
I don't know. You tell me.
It wasn't anything fun like
No,
that.
I wasn't getting at that.
Oh,
No, in fact, the pedophilia thing is sort of it's like that's an accident.
Mm.
Well, in a way, I guess it does fit with my theory. But yeah, I mean, no, I wasn't suggesting that. I was just saying, like, what was the priest to you? Like, how did he
I remember the
treat
priest.
you? What were your feelings about him?
One of them I thought was. One of them was a really cool guy. He drove this purple 57 Chevy, and I think he had some tats, or at least that's how I remember him.
Thank you. There you go. There, I'm right again. Yeah.
Right, maybe. And then there was this other guy who I thought was frightening to me, that he would walk around and he supposedly had this power to touch children on the head and make them fall over. And I remember watching my friends, again, 4th grade or so, like he'd press them and he'd be giving them the power of God and they'd collapse, almost like Pentecostal type of thing. And then when he did it to me, I'm like, this isn't no way. And then, of course,
I can't even tell you how many black drag queens are former Pentecostals.
I'm going to see an art show from a black
Yeah,
drag queen tonight.
I think it's so. There's this hierarchy and external authority and all that stuff, but there's also in the Catholic Church and with Pentecostals, but certainly Catholic Church, it's tremendously sensual. Even if it's authoritarian, there's go into a Catholic church and tell me what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right? It's generally
Lavish.
beautiful and
Yes.
lavish, right? Going to a typical Protestant church, right? Mainline Protestant church. It's like
never been.
bare walls,
Okay.
white wall. Oh yeah, it's all austere, ascetic. They kind of made modern Christian asceticism the dominant thing.
I think at the time that would have been more interesting to me. Part of what I found, other than the hierarchy, the restrictions, I didn't like the lavish nature
you
of
didn't
the church.
like that?
No. I would be there, and even as an altar boy, I remember thinking, like, sitting there, like, waiting to ring the bells. My thought was like, I want to just stand up, scream, and whip these bells into the crowd, and then just sit down and pretend nothing happened. I was so angry at the whole structure of it, and that's probably why I have anger at people like Obama or Sessions or whatever there is today. Certainly, that's I think that what drives me in what I do right now.
Yeah. I don't get angry at Jeff Sessions. I get angry at the left. Why? Because for Jeff Sessions, he's just the priest who's trying to punish me. Or here you go, he's the slave master who just wants to whip me. Now I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna I'll kill him if I can, and run. I'll do anything I can to get away from him. But it doesn't bother me. The ones who really get into me, into my soul, and really make me full of hate and want to do things like you wanted to do, are people like my family, my parents, people who are of the left, who really are very good at making me feel ashamed about my own thoughts.
Okay.
Your own thoughts are the problem. And when God is inside of you and you yourself are convinced that certain thoughts are evil, that's it.
That's some conflict there.
Yeah, so you were behaving much more like a slave, actually, on a plantation. Slaves didn't give a fuck about like the ethics of the masters. Some did,
interesting. Okay.
but generally speaking, they were just, because they're sensible human beings, they were just afraid of the whip, and so they did everything they could just to avoid the whip.
Yeah.
But they didn't think, oh my God, I'm lazy, and not working is lazy, and oh boy, maybe I should go work harder because that's what God thinks I should. No, they didn't give a fuck.
I had to go through a lot of work to keep like my old Metallica tapes underneath the house because they weren't allowed in home.
Metallica. Okay, so how did you get a hold of Metallica?
I don't know.
In your quarantined prison.
I mean, I still went to school. I had some,
Okay.
once I was a little bit older. So at some point I got my hands on tapes or someone gave me a copy like, oh, check this out, man. But I couldn't have it. I would listen to it through my pillow, through an old tape recorder, tape deck. And then during the daytime, those tapes would be in a bag underneath the home. So
Underneath the whole house, not just underneath your bed.
No, I took them outside and there was an opening that, I don't know, maybe the foundation, I don't really know much about houses, but like I would shove it underneath and I could like crawl and reach my arm all the way in there and pull it out and that'd be my prize tapes.
Yeah. You know who else doesn't internalize authority? Prisoners.
Well,
That's
yeah,
exactly
indeed.
They hide stuff.
Indeed. I've told
In
stories
the prison.
I've told stories like this to a therapist and like I saw her in tears. She's like, oh, wow, a child having to go through this. And I don't really, it's funny because I don't think of it as, it's just part of my experience. It's part of who I am right now.
Exactly.
It's part, I mean, Do I overdo what I do now because of that? I don't know. I feel like I really like what I do. I love what I like resisting authority. I think authority does a lot of really nasty stuff to a lot of people. They rarely have good reasons. I mean, you're talking about putting people in cages for plants, bombing people because for what? I mean, this is, people are being killed. Their lives are being destroyed all the time because they're following the law. I'm not into that.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think about like what makes me cry, you know, like
fried green tomatoes. I cry when I see that movie anytime.
Like your story, oddly, I don't know why. I'm completely on your side, of course, but like I don't. I'm not actually.
Well, you wouldn't be $200 an hour.
Maybe I would. If
I need crying to pay that.
Maybe we keep talking. I would cry. I just see you as a rebellious slave who escaped the plantation.
Yeah, maybe.
And who is free, seems to me, of the shame they tried to put inside of you. For the most part. I mean, I'm sure you have some of it.
Oh, I'm sure there's.
I'm sure, but you just seem to be less haunted by it than those who were convinced that they were bad.
I've spent many years telling stories of my childhood to people who are close to me. Just talking about this has been my experience, and generally the response is like, "Holy crap, man! I thought my like that was like that's really weird. Does that really happen?" And I think that's kind of a validation that like, oh, okay, I'm not nuts.
By the way, were you an only child?
No. Baby and the favorite.
How many were there?
I have an older sister and an older brother.
And what were they doing?
We're isolated from each other.
Oh, you mentioned your sister, yeah.
Yeah, my sister lives in Boston. She runs a chamber orchestra now.
So when you're in lockdown together, like how are you? I mean, did they rebel?
I don't know.
You didn't talk about it?
I don't know. I honestly.
You were isolated from them too?
I shared a bedroom with my brother, and I don't know. And if I talk to my brother today about things from our childhood, he has blocked it all out. I don't remember anything prior to age 16, he'll say. So it can be pretty traumatic. For me, it's been my coal, my fuel. So
let me ask you this. We haven't talked about this. Did they hit you?
I got hit. Yeah. I remember one point that the corporal punishment was just too much for me. And my dad had lost a job, and I think it was just, here I'm making excuses. I still love the man, right? And
well, it's good to understand why he would do something.
Yeah, and I do understand that, here's a guy who comes from a very patriarchal 1950s mentality. His mother, once his dad passed away, didn't know how to change the thermostat because she called it, quote, man's work. Right? My dad wouldn't make his own food for my own, for most of my upbringing. So this is, so he loses his job. So he's no longer the breadwinner. My mother's going to work. I think this puts a lot of strain on him. He's not used to being around children. And I got hit a lot.
Oh, boy.
And at one point, he cracks me on the hand, and I said, oh, that didn't hurt. It did. And he just kept doing it harder and harder and harder until at some point it stopped. Which is awful because I think anybody who meets my father, I mean, it sucks to have that conversation, but I've told that to a number of people, and it's like when they meet him, they're like, oh, your dad's kind of funny. I like him.
Yeah. That's what they said about my dad, too.
Oh, I like him?
Yeah, he was fucking monster in sort of different ways, but in some similar ways, too. I mean, I did get hit a little bit, not as much as you did, but yeah. It was
crazy because I wouldn't refer to him as a monster. I could imagine me calling him today and be like, oh, hey, how's it going? I don't talk to him very much. We don't have a really close relationship, but I love the man. And I think the reason that I can love him is because our relationship is very much like, hey, how's the weather? Oh, what are you eating? It's very, very simple.
My dad and I would just talk about the Civil War.
Oh, well, when I did that after I read like a Tom DiLorenzo's book, my dad was very pro-Lincoln.
Yeah, no.
How do you know that?
No, he would just recount, step by step, the Battle of Gettysburg and tell me exactly about Pickett's march and whatever it was,
I was just reminded to be wary of communists. Central power is good. U.S. actually won the Vietnam War.
I love that. Be wary of communists, but Central power is good.
I don't think that was the exact term, but that's how it came across.
Man alive.
To me,
I don't know what to say to you.
Bad.
Like I don't want to say sorry. I'm sorry. And not because
you're not crying.
Not because I'm not unsympathetic. I'm totally sympathetic. I don't know. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I don't relate to it. I don't know. I love that you can speak about it so fluently, though. I love that.
Well, I've just
That's
talked about
awesome.
it a lot.
It's rare, man,
Yeah,
to come across
like-
people, especially in our world, politics.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what this podcast is largely about. It's how it started as an idea. I wanted
It's
to
still
talk to
not.
political people who
Yeah.
generally lead, I think, impoverished lives when it comes to these things. They live in a very narrow world in terms of what they think and
We're
how
all a
they,
little aspy too.
how they
so.
express themselves. Well, that's what it's called. I'm going to stop
Yeah.
using that. I don't like that. You're
Okay.
not, clearly not, Asbury. You're very tuned in
Or it's a defense
to
mechanism.
yourself, to me.
Yeah,
I can
could
just
be.
tell.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious. I mean, you can't speak about things like this the way you do if you're Asperger's.
Okay.
I don't think. But no, it's certainly true that most people who do politics for a living can't say these things at all. Hasn't even occurred to them, right? They don't have the language for it. It's not a category. It's not important. It's not important, right? What's important is the national budget
Yeah.
and the immigration policy and the party structure and all that.
I spend a lot of time
And it's not relevant
Well, it is.
to them. Oh, I know. Thank you.
Absolutely
Thank you.
is, because I spend a lot of time on this.
Thank you.
And I don't make much money, and sometimes it's not easy, and not as much as I used to. Certainly my impact, my reach, and people who support me financially has grown over the years to the point where I'm able to live a decent lifestyle and maybe go buy some ramen when I want to, instead of always having to have I can only afford a pack of Cap'n Crunch and some fried tofu or something like that. So it's been a struggle. So I want to know, well, what the hell am I doing? Because I've had jobs in the past that paid me well. I used to be a nightclub promoter, for example, before I did this. So
That's not what you were supposed to do at all.
So I was a DJ and a nightclub promoter, and I would I remember with my friend Helen, who I love her so much. She just visited over Thanksgiving. She lives in San Francisco. She worked with me, and I remember there were times where after a club event, we'd go back to her place and hang out and have a pile of cash, and just like in the movies, we'd roll in it.
Oh, wow.
So I mean, I never saved it because I was totally irresponsible, but I had ways of living a much easier lifestyle than doing something that I believed in. And maybe that goes back to how you say, and this is where I think I have a lot of respect for my parents, even where I disagree with them, what you were talking about, someone who, even if you disagree with them, but holds the line on what they find is true for them.
Right.
I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah. Just don't do it to a child
Yeah, true.
or anyone else.
Well,
for that
that's
matter.
maybe a part of why I'm not having children either. So.
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah. So was that the first thing you did when you got to LA? Was become a DJ?
No, I was already doing it in Milwaukee.
Oh my gosh!
So-
What kind of music?
House music.
House music.
Yeah. I was pretty good too.
Sensual dance music.
Well, jazzy. Yeah. So sensual. Yeah. For sure.
People would dance to it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd sway, but in a dancing way. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you did that when you were in high school, when you were still at home.
No, early college.
Yeah. Oh
So-
yeah. Where'd you go to school?
I went to a bunch of places, never finished. I think.
Almost like most of the guests on this show.
Really? I went to University of Wisconsin La Crosse. I went to Marquette University. I went to Waukesha County Technical College to study to be a cop for a while.
No way.
Why?
How did that happen?
I don't know. I think I was still into the authoritarian
Yeah.
thing at that point. And then
What did your dad do for a living?
He was an engineer early on, and then he was an accountant. Now, like everyone in my family, he's an entrepreneur in that he runs an organization, a Catholic organization for youths. So,
Engineers. There we go. My dad was an engineer.
oh no way, okay.
Oh yeah, and loved rationality.
Interesting.
Loved reason, loved logic.
I didn't get a lot of that. I think my dad actually is that guy, but when reason or logic get in between that and maybe a religious argument, the conversation would be, but that's the way it's supposed to be. We don't question that. So that again fueled my desire to question everything.
Yeah, my dad took it all the way to atheism, which means that he was a pure scientistic rationalist, which meant that he loved, whenever he could, reduce human experience to numbers.
Oh, wow.
Well, I mean, that's what engineers do,
Yeah.
which is, God bless them when they're building bridges.
Yeah.
But when
My
they're,
dad did
but when they're
cranes.
talking to a kid, like their own kid, it doesn't work so well, right?
I don't remember a lot of conversations with my dad as a kid.
Yeah.
I just
That's
don't.
odd. That's interesting.
I just don't remember. Not maybe I blocked them out, but I don't remember a lot.
Well, maybe you didn't have many.
It's possible.
I didn't really
Yeah.
have a real conversation. We talked, of course, every day some way, but there's no conversations. That's the
Yeah.
whole point here, right? Because you're being reduced radically as a human being, basically. I mean, that's what your life was. And
Yeah.
my life was sort of like that, too, not nearly to the extent yours was, but right? I mean, you're getting.
This isn't a competition here.
Yeah, no, believe me, I don't want it to be. But yeah, right. I mean, you were being reduced in many ways.
Yeah.
And anyway, yeah, so you became an anti-authoritarian, of course.
I probably was for a long time if I was.
Yeah, and it's interesting that your whole career has been in opposition to, the big authority, the big
Yeah.
overlord,
Well, I don't think small.
the big master.
Yeah, I don't think small.
Yeah, right.
ever.
Because the federal government of the United States
Is
is
a
the most
very
powerful, it's the
dangerous
most powerful
beast. Yes.
institution or organization
In history, right?
In the history of the world by far. There's nothing even close, right? It can kill everybody on this planet
Yes.
10 minutes from now.
Oh, right. Didn't you just have an episode where you were talking about the submarines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really fast. I mean, it makes sense to me.
I didn't know that exactly. I mean,
Right.
you didn't know it,
Right.
apparently, right? Yeah, everyone needs to go immediately right now and look at the exact contents of the U.S. arsenal. The nuclear submarines is just one little part of it, by the
Yeah.
way. Just those submarines can kill everybody. That's just the submarines.
But the thing is, hearing that, it wasn't surprising to me.
You're
I
right.
wasn't like, oh, no way, I need to look that up.
Of course, yeah.
And I didn't, so maybe that means I'm lazy about like, accepting what I hear. But
So this, Michael, is why you are here, and this is why I support what you're doing as much as I support anything else, because you can't have an arsenal like that unless you have a massive nation state
yeah,
to fund it, to build it, right? You have to have something like a nation of, say, 350 million people in it, right? Just the tax base,
Yeah.
The productive capacity. It has to be a big thing, right? Switzerland cannot build that arsenal. They can't build those submarines. They just can't.
well, they don't have the same central power.
They
right?
don't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
any of it, right? But the size of it requires a huge nation state, which makes no sense, by the way. Like 350 million, I think it's getting close to 400 million now, right? Over this huge landmass, and then there's Alaska and Hawaii, but just this massive landmass, right, which has mountains and deserts and two oceans and a gulf and and how many languages and how many different cultures?
Only
and how many
one language.
so-called ethnic groups, right? Right. How many different? And then politically,
Yeah.
especially now, which is a good thing. But now we have, thank God, we have liberals and conservatives and libertarians and socialists, and now each one of those is a significant presence.
Yeah.
It didn't used to be, but now, right? And so, how? And we have people who love Donald Trump, and then we have many people. We have many people who love Donald Trump, and then we have many people who think he is Hitler and the devil combined.
Yeah.
How in the wide world, that's a Bill Clinton phrase I kind of like. That was the only thing I liked about him. He used to say, how in the wide world does it make any sense to have all those people citizens of the same nation state, the same polity, the same organization?
Well, I think that's basically what my work is all about.
I know.
Which is, okay, was this another
Yeah.
setup? Okay, that's great. You're good at this. So,
Oh, well, I don't know. I think in
because,
these ways, yeah.
I mean, that's what I talk about is,
I know.
You can't
But did you see how it's life and death for the species? Also, what you're doing?
help me connect that. It
If
doesn't,
we decentralize, if we devolve power, right? If the states break off from the United States,
even if they don't break off.
well, whatever. We stop giving them money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taxes, right?
Yeah.
We stop giving them, and stop putting their military bases
Yes.
in our states and our
Yes.
neighborhoods. If we stop, being either volunteering or being drafted into their army,
Complicit, yes.
right? Stop being in their driving their submarines across
Yes.
the ocean, right? All those things, right? They can't do it. They can't do it.
Yeah, it's opting out.
The military gets radically reduced
Yeah.
in its power, and it would be no longer possible to destroy all of China
and
in
there
10
would
minutes.
be no need for the Bluffdale NSA Center or the one in San Antonio.
I love this, what you say about, do the thing. I love your thing about the NSA Center in Utah, like what we should do.
Which isn't even the biggest one anymore,
Yeah,
mind you. So Fort Meade is being expanded in Maryland, and the old Sony factory in San Antonio is a larger one than the one in Utah. But basically, we take this is the opt-out, the nullification approach, where the only reason that those facilities exist is because back in 2006 or so, there was a concern. The documents have been released. You can find them on Google, that the NSA was close to maxing out the power grid in Maryland. So they were going to run out of power back then, and they are collecting way more data now. So they were like, oh man, we got to find more facilities. And the reason they chose Texas and Utah, for example, Texas for the independent power grid in Texas, and then Utah because they had cheap water, because the servers there are cooled by water. So they need about 1 million gallons. I can't remember if it's per week or per day or per month. They need a ton of water to cool those servers. But the water is provided by the city of Bluffdale, which is a political subdivision of the state of Utah. So let's say the city of Bluffdale said, well, we want to opt out and we don't want to participate in giving you this water anymore. That facility would be shut down in about
And it's
a day.
really up to Bluffdale alone?
Well, Bluffdale has a contract with the NSA. I would make the case that a contract made with the NSA under false pretenses that they were only spying on potential enemies is void on its own. But
because you know what I'm thinking, right? There's the Free State Project in New Hampshire, but like we could have the Free Bluffdale Project.
well, that would be awesome.
And how long would it take us to get a majority in Bluffdale? Not
A
long.
week?
Right. And we could take over the city council and then be like, hey, sorry, we're not going to give you water, NSA.
The city council has been the roadblock there because they've gone to the state legislature and they've basically...
why? Because they're politicians.
Yeah, of course. And they probably get all kinds of kickbacks to build all kinds of stuff to support this giant facility in the desert that wasn't there. They expanded the piping facilities, so the public works projects were massive because of the NSA, and these guys are entrenched in power. But certainly, whether it's in Utah or if Texas, there was a guy, Jonathan Stickland, who introduced a bill in the last Texas session there every other year to turn off electricity to the San Antonio facility. But this,
I love it.
I was told, I was at a small event hosted by a group called Restore the Fourth. It was me, ACLU, a guy named Hamid Khan from Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and myself, who were talking about ways to deal with the surveillance state. And I basically said, I know you guys aren't on board, especially I knew my friend at ACLU was not on board with this approach, but at some point, you are going to remember this, hopefully, that this is going to be your only path. And I maybe should hit up Peter Biebring at ACLU and see if he's thinking that, because for the last, 4 years or so, they've spent time lobbying Congress to stop their surveillance, and now it's worse.
Yeah, but something's changed since then. This guy, is now our president, who is Hitler and the devil and Genghis Khan.
ACLU put out a statement last week saying that they're now going to focus on electoral strategy to deal with surveillance.
I know. I'm not talking about the ACLU. I'm talking about, yes, I mean, I saw that. They're going to focus on electing Democrats.
Yeah,
that's what they're going to focus on.
Crap, too.
Yeah. No, of course. No, I love this strategy, man. I am so excited to even say this in public because I hope people will take this up because it's actually possible. And you can extend it, am I right? Not just to NSA.
Everything.
Military bases.
Everything.
Hello. They are in our electricity grid. They take the water from our localities, right? We could, I imagine, as localities, choke them off.
So in a place like Georgia, they do trash collection. The local government, they deal with the wastewater. I mean, what's going to happen if you can't flush your toilets? You can't, all this stuff is a real mess for them. And mind you, just days after Congress passed this surveillance reauthorization, this 702 thing, Michigan passed this bill that we're talking about, House Bill 4430 there. The Michigan House passed it 107-1. The state of Michigan would not provide resources or personnel to help enable federal surveillance programs that exist without a warrant. 1 or 2 days after.
Oh, just now?
It just happened.
Oh, wow.
So it now goes to the Senate there, which is very unlikely to pass. But certainly there are people who are willing, 107-1,
because of Trump.
To say, well,
I think it's
not necessarily Michigan, but
I'm just saying that I think a lot of people on the left
the
much more friendly to radical ideas like this now, right?
The first place that a bill like this passed was here in California. Senate Bill 828 passed while Obama was in office by a vote of 29-1.
Wow.
The state of California. But the way that I helped draft that bill, and it was carried by a guy who's now in Congress, it was so broad intentionally that it would basically require him to turn off power to all kinds of federal buildings. But so it got modified, but it got passed and signed into law by Jerry Brown. It needs a little follow-up to be effectuated, but California was the first state to actually take this approach on surveillance. They're not following through, but maybe now that Trump's in office, we can kind of tweak that a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. I think he's very useful, this Trump guy, for
Certainly.
this reason. Yeah, he's causing people, he's raising questions. He's causing people to think about these things for the first time.
Well, I mean, the fact that
like
people on the
nullification.
left are talking about nullifying the Fugitive Slave Act. This is amazing. And the article was so well written, too. I'm like, wow, you aren't ignoring this. You know about it.
Did you say that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren just recently started talking about states' rights?
Yes. The 10th Amendment, states'
rights?
Yeah, because, Bernie said states have a right to have marijuana. I mean, that sure sounds like states' rights to me.
Sounds like he's a racist to me.
Oh, he certainly is.
That is awesome. Yeah, but of course.
It won't last.
Well, exactly.
So as soon as there's a President Warren, it would be totally different. But then
we can use it against them, though.
Certainly. Well, it's going to be very
Not
difficult.
that they will have to listen to us, but we will have something to use against them.
It'll be very difficult for even the most slimeball mainstream reporter to be like, okay, you're talking about nullifying some national health care program from President Warren, right? Well, you must be a racist. Well, no, actually, I'm talking about the same thing that has been happening for years on the immigration issue or on marijuana. It's much more difficult because they've basically fallen into our trap of like having to use this approach, having to use these talking points.
You know, Bernie, he likes the drone war. He supports it.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
That's awful.
Oh, yeah. No, he's all for it.
Yeah.
You know, he may not have like pushed the button on just every one of those killings, those triple taps, whatever you call them, from drones. But no, he's publicly supported. This is known. But so isn't the what's the main place where they fly the drones? It's like Nevada. It's in Nevada or Utah.
It is in Florida.
There may be one there too. I think there's one in the desert out here.
One
of those states. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think those guys sit with their joysticks in a bunker. I think it's in Nevada or Utah.
Colorado.
Maybe. Oh, Colorado.
Yes.
Okay.
Colorado in the mountains. In fact, that I think was what Hunger Games, the mountains. If you've read this, I think they based it on that bunker or that thing in Colorado.
So Colorado just basically nullified one federal law, but you know we can choke that off too.
For certain.
Yeah.
Well, and
because that could get some serious popular support.
One of the guys
even though Bernie supports it, right?
Yes.
I'd say
His
most of his
supporters
base do not.
No.
And that's the big disconnect between the two.
Yes.
But that's a widespread feeling. Even a lot of people on the right do not like the drone war.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind
Well,
of the rise of Trump was part of that, right? A lot of the rise of Trump had to do with anti-war sentiment. Scott Horton talks about this on the right, and I mean hardcore right. And I think he's right. We need to renew the anti-war right, which used to be a thing and can be again. It kind of was for a minute there. But anyway, I want people to do this. I think it makes so much sense, and it's so exciting, and it could really, really not bring down the government, but it could really at least raise these questions in a way that directly affects people, that makes it dramatic and in their face, and they start to understand this broader structure that is so dangerous. It's so dangerous. It's not just about weed and putting people in prison. It is about killing everybody, potentially. Everybody or anybody.
A lot of people on the right tend to be the law and order types. I've heard for years, civil disobedience, not following the law. There's ways to do that. The Supreme Court or you got to elect new people, have them overturn it. And Jeff Sessions even says this on weed. He says, okay, if you don't like this, get your Congress to change the law. Well, it's interesting because the right tends to be the people that really revere the founders, for example. And I build my whole argument on this going all the way back to Patrick Henry in resistance to the Stamp Act, John Adams, James Madison in Federalist 46 actually advised specifically, quote, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. So the right seems to have ignored this. Maybe this is government-run schools not teaching it, but this is part of the American tradition of just defying acts that are, I guess they called them usurpations at the time. They're not obligatory, they were said. Theophilus Parsons in Massachusetts during the ratifying convention specifically said, any usurpation of power is not obligatory, and any person would be justified in its resistance. This is not like resistance of today, but like real resistance. And this is part of our culture that's been lost, and it's really important to kind of reactivate. And that's what we're trying to do. And on the water thing, what's cool is it's already been done. I don't know if you've ever seen we've done some light work on this, but as I was doing some research on this proposal to deal with NSA, I found that Nevada has already done this to the Department of Energy. They actually refused to issue water permits for the building of Yucca Mountain, the nuclear waste repository. And I mean, I think we all know that thing is not functional today.
My gosh. I didn't know. I didn't connect the two.
Nevada turned off the water specifically to the federal government. The federal government could not build the structure and get it rolling. It went to court, and the federal district court actually sided with Nevada. Not that I would rely on the courts, but yeah.
Wow. So Yucca Mountain was going to be what?
Nuclear waste facility.
Well, nuclear waste. Okay, not a.
It's still Department of Energy.
Not a military thing, but yeah, no. Okay,
that's still military.
Well, I mean, yes, sure. Yeah, no, that's exciting. Yeah, no, God,
it's been done.
I want to do this right now. I want to go run for city council somewhere, like right now.
Well, that's what you would do. And I saw
it's a lot easier than taking over a whole state, by the way.
It is. Well, I mean, a city council can have a lot of power, but you also have to remember that cities are political subdivisions of the state.
Sure.
So
you would immediately come in conflict with the state.
Yes.
I understand that. But,
so there are issues.
But at least you could make this statement in a really loud way.
Absolutely.
If you just got the city council to do
Absolutely.
something like
If
this.
the city council in Bluffdale basically passed a resolution saying we don't want to participate in NSA surveillance anymore, dear Representative Mark Roberts, who's a guy who's filed this legislation in Utah, for example, to deal with NSA, we really back you. Here's your local community. We're behind this. That would make a huge difference.
And then dumbass cracker Jeff Sessions marches into town with his deputies, right, and locks everybody up. And we are going to be heroes to everyone.
Well, he's not going to do that without the help of the local sheriff anyway. So, I mean,
again,
in general, when I talk to people...
about drama in a good way.
For sure.
Right?
I mean, they're already talking about trying to, and the DHS has put out a statement recently saying, we're looking at ways on how to arrest local officials that don't help enforce federal immigration laws. I'm thinking, oh man, what are they going to do, arrest the mayor of San Francisco?
I'm just saying, but we wouldn't be Clive and Bundy in that case.
No.
We would be heroes on Rachel Maddow's show. We would, wouldn't we?
Well, that would be fun because I would only focus on being neo-Confederate if Rach talked.
Right, we would be if we're going against Trump and Sessions.
Yes, and
against the war state. Yes, then they would care about the war state. You know, but certainly just Trump and Sessions being threatened by Trump and Sessions.
Yes,
we're going to be on MSNBC every night.
Yeah,
and my mom will see me on TV,
and then she'll like you.
Everything comes full circle.
But she loves you now already.
Yeah, and well, we're okay. Let me ask you this. Were your parents, I take it they were, but let me just make sure, are they or were they evangelical?
No.
Oh, okay. But they wanted to make sure that no one got an abortion?
Yes.
And they wanted, okay, so how's that not evangelical?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah, okay. To them, they weren't. They didn't think of themselves as evangelical?
No.
Because, of course, Catholics don't think or haven't thought of themselves as evangelical even when they were marching across the globe and forcibly converting savages.
Right.
We're not evangelical. We're just spreading God's word. But did your parents didn't think in that way? Did they think like, should we make sure that people in Florida and Southern California have the right ideas and behave properly? Should we make sure? They did, right? They wanted to have laws passed.
For sure.
Banning abortion and other things. Yeah,
sure.
yeah. To enforce a universal, right?
Yes.
A universal law.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So, right. So they were universalist and evangelical in that way.
But they would never describe it like that.
But you would agree with me that they were?
Well, now that it's presented to me, because I don't really know.
So in other words, they had universalist ideas.
Yes,
they believed
absolutely.
that there were ways that people should think and behave that applied to everyone in the world for all time.
Yes, it's not. There's no differences based on culture.
Okay, so here's the problem with the 10th Amendment Center.
I like that it's the problem.
I think it is.
Okay.
And it does not stop me from loving you and the 10th Amendment Center. I think it's just a problem, and it's not a problem immediately.
Okay.
But it could very well be a problem when we take over the city council and shut down the Air Force Base, okay?
Okay.
Which is this, that in the name of the organization and in the heart of the argument that you put forward to justify the organization's work are the Founding Fathers. And the ideas of the Founding Fathers, particular ideas of the Founding Fathers, which come from what we call in political theory, political philosophy, natural law.
Okay.
Right? Natural rights. Thomas Jefferson and company believed, right, didn't they, that not just white people from Virginia had the right to speech, but that all people, well, he carved out an exception, but the idea, he meant it, is universal. I mean, he got a obvious contradiction. But yeah, the idea is universalist, right? And this is the only, that's consensus. You know, everyone who studied this agrees with that. That's a universalist idea, right? It's absolute and universal. Applies
Empire
everywhere.
of Liberty, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There you go. Then the only question is whether they were evangelical, one, about that, and two, imperialist about it, right? Because if you believe, now I happen to believe that if you think that there is a morally good way to be in the world, that you're kind of obligated to make sure it happens, especially if you are directed by the God of the major Christian churches like the Catholic Church, right? I mean, if you're doing nothing, if you think, oh, well, it's fine if the savages over there in Africa, you know, cut off the clitorises of their children and practice voodoo, whatever, it's not my business. I think it's bad and wrong, but it's their business. I find that to be not Christian, actually. I think that's a contradiction. Okay, so now I also think that's true with natural law. I think that's also true with the ideas of the Founding Fathers. Now, what I'm putting forward to you is a minority position among those who have studied the founders and natural law and John Locke and all that stuff, right? But I just see that. Now, then you can look at what the founders did and what they said subsequent to writing the Declaration of Independence and other things.
Some of the founders, right?
Yeah, but a lot of them and most of the big ones.
Yep.
And it's hard to find exceptions to this. Pretty much right away, including Jefferson himself, started to talk about, oh, well, yeah, we want to make sure that these ideas spread across the world because they're right and good and godly. Sometimes they would say that, but certainly right and good, morally good, absolute, universal. They were universalists, no doubt about it. And they understood this, right? It's like, well, we don't just sit on this good thing here and let the rest of the world go into barbarism. And so what did Jefferson do when he was president, right? He established the Marine Corps of the United States of America and sent them where? To Tripoli. Right, There's their song. The Barbary pirates who were what? Islamists, sort of, maybe. They were Islamic, we know that. They were Muslims. And it was said at the time by Jefferson and others, you know, well, partly we're protecting our ships from getting raided by these pirates, but also it's kind of a barbarous, backward religion and set of ideas they have. And so it's going to be, we're going to expand the beneficence of the United States and American ideals and this idea of natural law because it's natural. It's natural to have freedom of speech. It's natural to have a constitutional republic. It's natural to have the right to vote. And so those people are living unnatural. So this idea started to become fully realized once they took power. And next thing you know, we have the Monroe Doctrine, which says, so now all of Latin America, we're going to make sure they live more or less like we live. And
which is interesting because Monroe was an anti-federalist.
Yeah, I know. Well, it didn't matter. So you crossed those lines right away. Well, Jefferson was the original anti-federalist.
Isn't that the argument? Well, he and Patrick Henry were not
But
friends.
he's kind of the leader of that.
In a way. So is that an argument more for saying that power corrupts?
No, it's an argument for changing the name of your group.
Okay.
and to not rely on the Founding Fathers because
I don't always. So I'll also rely on Rosa Parks, for example.
How is she a nullifier?
think
She
about
nullified local law.
That's fine.
Okay.
No,
yeah.
I mean, why does nullification only have
that's
to
fine.
be
Yeah,
applied?
yeah.
So, I mean, I've talked about Rosa, and I have a poster that's been up in my office for years that has a great quote from Rosa Parks.
Yeah, people don't. I'm more or less agreeing with you. Yeah, I just want to clarify for people who don't know this because it's off because of the way that the civil rights movement is taught.
Yes.
And the history of these things are taught. We think, oh, it's just racism,
Yes.
and she just overcame racism. No, I mean, yes, but also it was a law,
Yes.
right? It was a law that
she defied.
Yeah, that she defied and then became struck down. So that's a devolution of power
Yes.
as well. Yes, correct.
Yes, it could also be done on a local level. So the same things that I talk about. So for me, I look at the Constitution as kind of the baseline. I think a lot of people would like to think that they support the Constitution. I think most people really don't, because when you apply it consistently, it kind of butts up against their own political preferences. So people who are with me, for example, on the idea of people of each state being able to make their own decision on weed. Bernie's now a states' rights guy on weed. It's only because he wants to either use that as a political bludgeoning tool to oppose somebody, or maybe he's actually on board on that issue. But on the same thing, he's not going to be using that same approach against Obamacare. So
he's opportunistic.
Certainly. But talking to, now this is just anecdotal evidence, of course, but most people I talk to, wherever they come from on the political spectrum, I almost never hear. I mean, there's people from Ancapistan in one area that look at the
anarcho-capitalists.
Yeah. They come from
hardcore libertarians.
The view that the Constitution is a slave document. And then there's other people that come from the left that look at the Constitution as a slave document for different reasons. Right?
Right.
So there are far fewer people who look at it as a bad thing, and more people in the marketplace who are like, oh, wow, you're just trying to get them to follow the rules that we, the people, have given to them. I'm all on board. So certainly that is my baseline. And I do spend part of my work trying to teach the way that things are supposed to be, even though it's like people in power will never listen to that. I can't rely on that. I think the general concept is still, it's not even decentralization. It's more like a distributed power network. Decentralization still acknowledges maybe that each power center is still being connected to the centralized power center. But you're going to exercise some power here. A distributed network means each section is its own power center. And I think that might be a better example of what I talk about.
But am I right? You're always pushing power down. You're trying to push it, wherever it is, you want to push it
more
down.
Local, yes.
You devolve it, right? Yeah. Which I'm 1,000% on board with. Okay, so the politics of what you're doing, I'm completely there. I just think, so it sounds to me like you're taking sort of a pragmatic approach here, right? Because you'll take Bernie, even though he's cynical opportunist when he's for states' rights, but that he doesn't really.
Yeah, for sure.
But So what I'm saying is, that's only going to work so far.
Okay, then someone smarter can take it from there.
What I'm saying is, when we take over the city council, right, in our little town in the desert, and we say we're not going to give whatever, and we're going to say we're not going to give water to the Air Force Base or the nuclear power, whatever it is, then Rachel Maddow, who has a PhD in political science, is going to say, well, okay, I like the fact that you are opposing Trump because he's evil.
Yes.
But you know what? This is troubling because when my guy gets into office, well, no, listen though, it's not just that she would have an actual argument against me that I couldn't counter. If I am working within the intellectual framework. Yeah, okay. Yeah. She will say, well, wait a minute. Aren't we all in this together? And don't we all want to make sure that everyone lives according to principles that are just and right? And so what you're saying is, Thad, mayor of Bluffdale, that your particular interests override the interests of the nation. And by the way, Thad, Russell, you and your buddy, Michael, think that many of the people in your state and even in your city that you now control voted for the president of the United States, and you're saying so isn't it anti-democratic what you're doing here? You're nullifying the choice of the people. They voted for the guy who said, I'm going to have an NSA center.
Something
in
is
Utah.
not connecting in my
Why?
brain on this.
It's anti-democratic. So I'm thinking of people who on the left are calling for removal of the president of the United States, right? By any means necessary, right? That you have establishment people saying that now. And the argument against them by people like Tucker Carlson and others, and I think there's a decent argument here, is that that's anti-democratic because whether you like it or not, that was a democratic choice by the people. And I understand the Electoral College, but basically, according to the rules, and it's a democratic system, essentially, right? They chose Donald Trump. The people, and what you're saying is you're going to get rid of him by other means, by extra parliamentary means, or by means that are basically anti-democratic. You're going to sort of cancel this democratic decision, right? And so that's what I would effectively be doing by shutting off the water to the Air Force Base in Utah that was put there by the president and the Congress
Utah,
who were put into office by the vote of the people in Utah and the rest of the United States. So I'm just sort of nullifying. I'm like, fuck you. No, I'm going to stop the democratic people, the demos, from making this decision because I don't like the Air Force.
Well, it'd be very unlikely for you to pull that off if the state wasn't behind you. So, I mean, it's really not going to happen if the entire state is in some way backing you up. I mean, sure.
And then that's just their first argument. It's
of course.
anti-democratic, right? And
Yeah.
the bigger one is that, don't we need to make sure that all people in the world live better?
Okay.
Yeah, and meaning that
By doing that,
better
we're going to have
according
less surveillance.
better according to
Yeah,
how
of course. Well,
we
yes.
think they should live.
Yes.
And Michael Boldin, don't you believe in freedom of speech as a principle? And Thaddeus Russell, don't you? Well, sure, yeah, in principle, I don't know, but as a law, I'd prefer that, blah, blah, blah. Well, don't you think it's your duty now to make sure that everyone in the world lives in a place where speech is protected?
That's the Jeff Sessions mentality,
And-
which is I have a view and I'm going to force it on everyone. I've talked on podcasts many times, on libertarian podcasts, about the libertarian dictator. This is a very dangerous approach in my view because every time you give power to someone to do something you support,
You know what his
eventually...
name was? You know what his name was?
The libertarian dictator?
Pinochet,
Yes,
right?
right.
That's what they did. That's
Was
what
he
that
a libertarian?
Well, no, but he put into place libertarian principle
Okay.
or policy, at the point of a gun. That's what neoliberalism really is. That's its original meaning was
they had
what
their
the
own 9/11,
what the
right?
Chicago school did with Pinochet in Chile.
Well, it's dangerous to have
Which was-
someone with that kind of power.
Yeah, privatization, but it's forced people. They put people in prison who oppose this, et cetera. Anyway,
I like the Mencken approach, which is I believe in liberty, but I'm not enough to try to force it on anybody. I like to there will always be those people who are like, oh, this is amazing. Now let's make everyone do it.
right.
And they're going to exist. I want to show people a different way, that it's a better choice. And if you make that choice as well, then that's great.
Okay, so I love that, and that's who I am. What I'm saying is,
It's going to be difficult.
no. What I'm saying is the founding fathers didn't agree with you.
Not all of them.
They were
no.
universalists.
Yes.
And eventually, pretty quickly actually, evangelical, missionary, imperialists. So within like a couple decades, we've got the United States Navy and the Marines and the Army already scattered. First of all, they did establish an empire, the Empire of Liberty. That's Thomas Jefferson's
Yeah, I know.
phrase. Yeah. On the landmass, of course, they just move west and kill everybody and take over all this place. And they say, as part of it, hey, manifest destiny, right? It's our duty. It's our godly duty. That was manifest destiny. It's our destiny established by God himself to improve this land because these savages didn't know how to do it. They were just sitting on this beautiful land and not growing crops in it. We're gonna take over and grow things and make it commercial, and we're gonna become rich.
Okay, so here's my question.
Okay.
So are you basically making the point that if someone comes up with a good strategy or a product and then misuses it later, you shouldn't pay attention to them? So Germans shouldn't use the Autobahn?
In this case, the product is natural law.
I mean, because I'm not really talking about natural law in my work in general. I generally talk more about, I don't spend a lot of time on it.
I know
I
that.
spend more time talking about Madison said if you want to defeat a federal program, try this strategy.
And that's another reason why you're sitting here. That's another reason I wanted to talk to you.
Oh, okay.
Because I saw this potential I could intervene and maybe just talk to you about this and highlight what I think is maybe a contradiction, because I know a lot of people like constitutionalists,
Yes.
who on policy often are really good in terms
Well,
often. No, I mean like the Ron Paul.
Ted Cruz
like
was a supposed
Ron Paul, like the Ron
constitutionalist.
Paul Constitution.
Okay.
Like Ron Paul's a constitutionalist,
Yes.
right? All of his arguments sort of begin and
Yes.
end essentially with the Constitution.
Yes.
Now, in real policy terms, that is, from my position, almost always good, because it's becomes anti-imperialist,
Yes,
and
of course.
but I find it intellectually
Dishonest?
impossible to. No, not dishonest. I think he believes this, but I think there's a huge contradiction, and I think it's just because you can't sustain it, and it's also, I think he doesn't really understand what the founders were about. And not just the founders, but the ideas of the founders.
I've read some letters between Madison and Washington, and I know that, for example, James Madison, this is a guy that I cite more than most on strategy. James Madison, more than probably most of them, wanted basically a centralized imperial power. He actually proposed in something called the Virginia Plan a national negative in all cases whatsoever. This is what he told Washington just before the Philadelphia Convention. We need this. It's a defensive, they considered it a defensive mechanism to further centralize and have all this great power in one location, because they thought that if they didn't have it, states would evade and defeat all federal acts. Well, to me, that's the argument for what I'm saying. Like, okay, well, they didn't pass that. They rejected that plan specifically. And so therefore, wow, if states can evade and reject all federal acts, why don't they start doing it? So I think I'm not really even getting as deep as what you're talking about here. And if it gets to a point where people are turning off water to federal agencies, or in North Carolina, they stop helping a CIA rendition program, then okay, I'll worry about that at that point, I think.
Okay, what is the 10th Amendment?
Oh, we're going to get into, am I going to quote it?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see if I got this. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. I've got one of these readouts on my glasses.
Well, you've been doing this for a while.
I have to say it like
I
I'm
put
like,
you in the spot there.
Yeah.
So that's what, 28 words or something? I think
Yeah,
you told
26,
me.
28.
Yeah, okay. Well, now, that can be interpreted in a lot of ways, can't it?
Okay, give me an example.
Well, I mean, geez, I don't know, but it's first of all, I think that any text can be interpreted at least in more than one way, and some crazy people like me would say in infinite ways.
I haven't heard that one actually interpreted in a lot of ways.
Okay, and then there's the question of how a text has been interpreted historically, and this is the question with the Constitution, right? Always, it's how has it been interpreted since it was written, right, by the courts and others.
So on the 10th, I think the misinterpretation,
I actually read it as almost empty of meaning. I don't actually see much there.
The courts
to work
call
with.
it a truism.
Yeah, right.
This is something that we've already acknowledged. The people who argued in favor of the Constitution actually considered adding that or a Bill of Rights was dangerous because stuff that wasn't in the Constitution anyways, well, it's, that's already reserved. This is kind of how this works. So it's a legal rule of construction, and there hasn't been very little debate that powers that are not delegated are just kept back for the people of each state to decide. The question is what powers have been delegated. So the rest of it is where all the questions kind of come up.
Right. So as you know, in court decisions, in the arguments, the question is always for the originalists or constitutionalists. Yeah. Well, yeah, the text itself, taken by itself, is hard to understand and interpret, right? So what you do is, of course, you ask, what did the founders intend?
Or what did the ratifying conventions actually think it means?
The guys who wrote it. Yeah.
Well, less the guys who wrote it and more who gave it the legal
force. Who voted for it.
Yeah.
Sure, whatever. Yeah, those guys, what did they think this meant, right?
Yep. And in Virginia, it was like the property owners.
What I'm saying to you is that there's a bunch of evidence on both sides of this, but there's a bunch of evidence that they thought of these things as principles that should be applied universally. Now, with the 10th, it's weird because it's kind of a negative principle in a way, right? It's a protection against. So that's good. I like that. But again, why shouldn't we be running around the world in our Humvees and tanks making sure that the 10th Amendment is in every country's constitution?
Isn't that kind of what's happening?
Well, I'm just saying, man. I don't know.
I don't know how many bases are there.
I love
170
I
or
know,
something.
and that's what they are actually supposedly doing. That
Yes.
is the actual justification,
Yes.
is to make sure everybody lives according to a constitutional,
Or is it that they're trying to make
in
us
a
safe?
constitutional republic that looks like ours, basically. Sure.
yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. That's pretty much up front and always has been since Jefferson. They've been saying that. Now, there were debates, no
Yes.
doubt about it,
Yeah.
through the 19th century, for sure. But I'm telling you, like all the way back to the very beginning, a lot of the guys who we think of as the big anti-imperialists in among the founding fathers, even they, like fucking Jefferson,
Yes,
founded the
yes.
Marine Corps. You know,
Are you making a Spooner argument here?
maybe. I've never read Spooner, believe it or
I've
not.
read some
I
Spooner.
just heard half of my audience die because they assume I get told all the time that I'm like Spooner, and I'm an American historian, and I've never actually read the
A
guy.
lot of people who quote Spooner.
I just
it's very
lost.
popular.
I just lost half
It's
my
very popular
audience
in,
there.
in online comments. Anytime there's a constitutional discussion, come up to quote very much one quote from Spooner that he basically says, you know, what we have now, the Constitution either authorized it or was powerless to prevent it. This is the Spooner thing. But for years before that, for decades, Spooner made he wrote tons of white papers, we could call them today, about constitutional issues.
I'm just saying it can cut against us as easily as it can cut in favor of us.
Okay.
And it has. I mean, as I said, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence have totally been read as injunctions to become an imperialist global power,
Well, I
to
guess-
remake the entire world in our image. I mean, that is what was done with it, certainly beginning in 1898, and the establishment of an overseas empire. But everybody agrees on that.
Yeah.
Okay, that the Declaration of Independence basically says, their reading is that we
Everybody,
must
yes.
extend it across the world. But if you know anything about Manifest Destiny, basically, and the march westward and the conquest of the West, that wasn't the only argument that was made, but it was a common argument that all we're doing is extending our goodness to these other people.
At the point of a gun.
Yeah. It's our duty, because they're living worse than we are, where they're living an ungodly or un-American, and those things become conflated, of course,
yes.
ways. So it's our duty as good Christians and good Americans to make sure they live like we do.
Well, that's why I ask if you're making a Spooner argument, because
Yeah,
is it the
probably.
document? Well, so
From what I hear, yeah.
So the point of view is that the document has failed to do what it's supposedly do, but words on paper don't do anything. Human action
No,
does.
I don't know what Spooner's argument is. My argument is that the problem is in the text itself.
Okay.
The Constitution and the Declaration, and depending on it, is the heart of the problem.
Oh,
So
okay.
the way that I look at the Constitution and
Yeah.
the Declaration, not the Declaration, I don't like any of the Declaration actually. I think it's just an absolute injunction to kill people, to save them. I do. But the Constitution, parts of it, obviously, I want to live in a place where what's called freedom of speech is protected.
Yeah.
Sure, But I also know that it can be that First Amendment can be read in lots of ways.
Okay, so
All of the amendments, all of it can be read in many ways, as you know, because that's what Supreme constitutional historians
Yes.
and jurists and lawyers and professors have been arguing about for 250 fucking years, right? Is what this thing says. And I totally believe that it's legitimate to read the First Amendment as saying the government shall never abridge my right to speak, and I can also see it as totally allowing the government to abridge all kinds of speech.
Well, another argument
Why
on
not?
that one, an interesting one, is that it does say Congress. So I've been told by some constitutional scholars that they intentionally put that there because they wanted the executive branch to actually still reserve the power to interfere in free speech.
And then all you got to do is look at a whole bunch of the founders who ratified that damn thing, who were totally anti-speech, were all about censoring people and, put people in jail for
And some of the people who were opposed to it, so like anti-federalists in Massachusetts, were actually, some of them were opposed to it because they wanted a religious test.
Right. So then what was the intent of the founders there, of the framers, right? It can go either way.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying you can't put all your eggs in that basket.
Well, I don't.
Good. And that's why you're here. I mean,
So
that's what I'm
to me,
talking
it's
to you.
the baseline.
That's
It's
why
the
Ron
baseline.
Paul is not sitting in front of me, because I don't think he would even understand what
Well,
I'm
I
talking
called him.
about.
He said he couldn't make it.
I know he's busy in his retirement. No, honestly,
I
mean that.
I think the constitutional arguments are important for people who want to hear those arguments.
Yeah.
My goal is decentralization, more freedom, and I think, or distributed, right? I'm like contradicting myself on that, but my goal is that. And For those that want the constitutional arguments, I can make those arguments for them. For those who think it's a slave document, I'm okay, it's a slave document. Let's talk about what Rosa Parks did, or when Martin Luther King Jr. said one has a moral duty to disobey unjust laws. It's the same thing that I make the arguments for from other directions. I want people, and this just may be my, my recovering Catholic part, the anti-authoritarian, is that I want people to defy these people. I want masses to defy government institutions. And I think whatever means necessary, that I'm going to encourage them to do that or show them how they can and actually make it happen. That's what's important.
And to reduce and break apart government power as much as possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the more they defy it, then it, let's say, for many years, in essence, federal marijuana prohibition has been on the books. And although it does harm a lot of people, in comparison to where it was 20, 30 years ago, it's far less harm. So people are making a living off of this. People are able to go without, and in most cases, without threat of damage to their lives.
Yeah. So I am donating to the 10th Amendment Center. I hope that everybody who's listening donates a ton of money to the 10th Amendment Center. I am 100% in favor of what you're doing, enthusiastically. I think that it's arguably the most important. I kind of said this at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
I think this may be the key to saving everybody, honestly.
Well, it's really, the way I see it, it's the only way that you can have, if we're just talking about United States of America, a country that's so large, 400 million people, with so many political, economic, religious, social views, all living together in peace without always trying to control everybody.
Totally. But what exactly, how unlikely is it that someone at some point in the not too distant future will push the button? Right?
Oh, man.
Because we now have this guy. I don't think he will actually, but I do think I'm nervous. But I'm nervous about everybody. But how do we know? Because the president can literally say, kill them all.
Yes.
And in 10 minutes, China and Russia are smoking heaps.
I just watched an episode of Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams. The last episode of the season is called Kill All Others. It was a presidential candidate in year 2500 who made this statement, and basically they were going to kill, you don't know who the others are, but send people out and start killing everybody who you oppose.
Yeah, so it's like we've got to, so we can certainly, try to revive the nuclear disarmament movement, which oddly has disappeared. It used to be a big thing
especially
in the 80s.
Washington State. Huge there. People were barricading highways, blocking.
Yeah, but nationally, it's not.
No,
it's barely registers, right? It's really disturbing to me. But that's one way to go, try to revive that. But I think it's much more important, actually, to get people to just shift their consciousness in a different direction. We're talking about a sea change here, meaning like an actual reversal of the ways in which people's minds work, which is that they tend to think outward globally, sort of evangelically, right? We need bigger structures, bigger authority to control the bad people in the world. And you know what's used? I call it the Hitler blackmail, right? If we don't have a global government for good, well, we're going to have another Hitler who's going to do horrible things, right? So that's always the argument. Like that's the argument for NATO.
Yeah.
That is the argument for NATO. We'll have a Hitler or Stalin if we don't have NATO. And if we don't now the argument is if we don't extend NATO all the way around Russia through Asia and encircle the damn place, you know, we're going to have, Putin or the next guy there will become Stalin or something equally terrible, right? It's this blackmail. And that's people's sort of default. I think they just sort of, especially in the West and in America, they tend to think outward in that way, right? More out, bigger, extend the power out there. That's why these bases everywhere, to make sure we don't have another Hitler. That's the only reason I think that Americans even
are okay with it. So the general public goes along with it because they're afraid.
Well, I don't know for sure, but I've had this conversation with hundreds of people. Literally, it's like when I propose, tearing down all those bases and bringing all the troops home, it's the panic is their response, right? Oh my God, wait a minute, whoa.
The people of Okinawa would be very happy.
But think about it, right? Yeah. And I sympathize with that because I was actually built that way too, and I have to sort of reprogram myself. But I think their immediate thought is, oh no, wait, hold on, there are bad people in the world who will do bad things now if we don't have the Marines and the Army everywhere, right? And so I think you gotta just reverse that way we think. And that's a cultural question.
Yeah, I had a hard time.
Localism, decentralism, the default going there instead of the other way around, which is, as you know, that's really your problem.
We've all been indoctrinated that America's the good guy, spreading the empire of liberty.
Or that we need a good guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, interesting.
We need a good guy. We need a dad.
Yeah.
No, really, right? A dad with that kind of power to make sure the bad guys don't come across the fence into our house, Michael, right?
We didn't have that fence.
Right. Because you had the dad.
That was about keeping
because you had the dad.
Though.
Yeah.
So that might be an argument against the border wall too. So.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I do think the intellectual stuff I just dragged you through, I think it actually is. I really do think it's important. I think it's that crucial if this is going to become a major movement that really changes the world, the big world. I think we can win some battles like with marijuana and stuff. And maybe we can get an NSA plant or NSA facility shut down. But I think it's really cultural, right? Politics always flows from culture. It's downstream, I think, from culture.
Well, it's hard for me. I was mentioning that my transition into this kind of thinking. I remember during Iraq War I.
Yeah, how did you do this?
Hard to think of maybe the U.S. not being the good guys. As I was a big fan of Michael Moore in the mid to late 90s. Remember seeing him. This was one of his book tour documentaries, the big one. He's in Times Square, and it was Clinton Dole maybe were running for office at the time. And he points out, he's like, look, they're both the same. They're both bad. And I'm like, wow. I'd never thought of it like that. So it wasn't necessarily an easy thing. I probably cried at some point thinking, wow, I can't believe how many people this country has killed in the name of freedom. And that doesn't make the country any better than some of the monsters it may have defeated. And it's always using that kind of fear tactic. It's not easy to get through that. Again, I could go back to government-run schooling. When I went to Catholic school, I was taught that Catholicism was the way forward. So then when I went to government school, I was taught that government was the way forward on everything. That was the protector of everything that I held dear. So that's a tough thing to get past. But I think the technology and people building maybe their own school online is a really important part of that transition for period.
That's
not that I'm just making a plug,
no,
but it is.
That's where it's at.
Yes.
Oh, no. So that's the cause for hope. So communication and the media, right? Decentralizing constantly and have been for 20 years now, right? And so that's really, that's why I am very optimistic, actually. I think ultimately we're going to get there. It's going to, I think, in other words, the sea change may even have started. I think people actually, in a way, are thinking more locally, right? Because they can have their own media channel, they can have essentially their own TV show, right, and all these things, and they can participate directly in politics now.
You can tweet at the president and call him all kinds of names, and that wasn't considered good decorum years ago, and now
total nobodies. 2 years ago now are major presence in political discourse. So yeah, that's it. But
that's a sea change in and of itself.
Absolutely. Compared
to 3 networks tied to the CIA, providing all information to everybody on every issue.
Absolutely.
That's huge.
It was basically Stalinism. I mean, the communications structure system in this country was Stalinist. There's no doubt. I mean, I will say that. I don't think that's even hyperbole. Between the 1930s and the 1990s, it was Stalinism. I mean, you couldn't really have a national TV network that didn't say particular things, and ABC, CBS, and NBC
said particular things, and that was it.
There was no difference ideologically, none. I mean, you could not identify a difference between Dan Rather and Peter Jennings. I mean, there was just no.
I would say even on many of the alternative media channels, the big ones, you also can't tell the difference. But it's the independent, the real, like the dude in his garage doing a YouTube channel getting 5,000 views, but you have 1 million people doing that, providing other things to think about.
Totally.
This is what opens people's minds because, oh, wow, that's way different than what Rachel said on TV. Maybe there's something else to look into. Will we look back on this in 50, 60 years and say this is the moment where things started to turn? I don't know. I mean, it's a huge part.
We can live without our dad. That's it. No, I mean it. That's really it. It's about growing up in that way, right? That's what we sort of should do. We're supposed to do in some ways.
You know how much meaning that has for me now. So like that,
Well,
I'm like rah on that one.
I just think it's for you, it's sort of closer to the surface maybe,
Yes.
but it's true for everybody, right? Because we're all born with a dad or a
Yep.
mom, or there's a parental figure. We can live without our parents. That's what people haven't done yet. They haven't really gotten to that point, like deeply psychologically, that feeling where I can really live alone without, not alone, but independent. I don't need this overseer, this overlord, this dad with all that power to protect me. We're fine. We're better without them.
Well, and it's also, again, decentralization.
Yeah.
What better way to learn what works and what sucks
It's like
than to have more options? The more options that are out there, the more that people can learn from them more quickly. So if you have a one-size-fits-all solution on every issue, again, it ends up being some kind of muddled political kind of compromise, but it takes so much longer. Healthcare, I mean, people who are in favor of like the Canadian healthcare system, which I am not philosophically, but Canada didn't come out and implement a one-size-fits-all solution. It started in Quebec, and it was a province-by-province thing. And people there, maybe I don't know the numbers, but people chose to do it piece by piece, and eventually it covers the whole country. I think whatever you are in favor of, that's the way to do it. Win by showing people how things that you want to accomplish work in practice.
Yeah.
So.
Just doing it, as you often say. Just do it now. Live the way you want to live.
There's this really cool kid that I met a few years ago who used to work for the city of San Bernardino, which is really one of the top on the poverty scale in the country. And he worked for the city, and this is shortly after the housing bubble crash. And he was talking to me about, man, I wish I remembered his name, but he was telling me, oh man, the city services, they're having so much trouble. They don't have the money to do this and that. Me and my buddies, we decided to open a marijuana dispensary. So we went around to our neighborhood and started telling people we're going to open up this business. And that year that they opened it, from what I understood, he had planned on replacing the city's like annual turkey dinner for the homeless with proceeds from the marijuana dispensary. This is an example of people just doing it, being creative about how they approach things and showing people that you don't need the dad or the government to actually provide these types of things. Individuals can make it happen.
Yeah, I think I used to sort of smirk at things like that back in the day.
Really?
When I was a lefty. Yeah, well, when you're a lefty, you're supposed to.
Okay.
I mean, most of us who were serious leftists, because we understood that you needed a major, a massive state, to make any real
That's
change.
just an isolated
You have to change.
anecdote,
You have to take control of the state to
Yep.
make any real change, and the rest of it's just charity, local charity that's not going to do anything. And I think actually that argument had some weight during the monopoly Stalinist period of media, et cetera. But now with all this ability to decentralize and people, it's so much easier to do your own thing now, either in media or communications or as an entrepreneur.
Man, my cousin who runs a cooking blog.
Totally.
I mean, instead of like the publisher who had to put out this cookbook, she's doing her own, taking the pictures at home. So like everything, all parts of business and our life are becoming more individualized and decentralized.
And you just do it. Just do it right now. Everybody who's listening, just leave your dad. just you don't need him.
I'm going to call him on the way home.
Good. Thanks, Michael. This has been really, for me, I don't know about you, but I love this. This was great.
This is awesome.
Good. I'm glad you liked it.
It's really cool.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, likewise.
This was the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To sign up for the Renegade University webinars, visit thaddeusrussell.com/courses. To support the show and become a member of the Unregistered community, go to unregisteredlisteners.com. Thanks for listening.